Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, settle into where you are, and let the shoulders soften a little. There is no hurry tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you. Tonight we join a caravan at the eastern end of the oldest road in the world, and we travel slowly westward, from market to market, gathering remedies as we go, until the saddlebags are full and the night is long behind us. Let your eye open onto the first morning of the journey. It is very early, and the light is the soft grey light that comes before the sun, the light that lies on a city while it is still half asleep. We are standing at the western gate of a great walled city in the far east of the world, a city of low tiled roofs and long straight avenues and tall earth, walls the color of pale sand. And the gate before us is a wide tunnel of dark timber and rammed earth, and through it, slowly, in the grey light, a long line of animals and men and loaded packs is beginning to move. This is the beginning of the road. From this gate, the road runs west and west and west again, across deserts and over mountains and through the gardens of distant kingdoms for many thousands of miles, until it reaches, in the end, the warm inland sea at the far western edge of the known world. We are going to walk that road tonight, the whole length of it, very slowly, in the company of the caravan, and we are going to learn the remedies of each land as we come to it. Because the goods that the caravan carries, the careful goods wrapped in linen and packed in wooden chests and sewn into leather bags, are very largely the medicines of the world. Let me tell you, before we set out, what a caravan is, for it helps to see it clearly in the mind, and the seeing of it clearly is itself a quiet and a settling thing. A caravan is a long line of pack animals, sometimes a few dozen, sometimes many hundreds, walking in single file along a narrow track, each animal loaded with two balanced packs, one slung on either side, and each animal led by a quiet man who has walked this road, or roads like it, for the whole of his working life. The animals are mostly camels, the great two, humped camels of the cold eastern deserts, slow and patient and complaining, and immensely strong, able to carry a load that would break a horse, able to go for days without water, able to smell a well from a great distance across the dry land, able to walk hour after hour with the long swaying patient gait that gives the whole caravan its slow rolling rhythm. Among the camels walk a few horses and a few small tough mountain donkeys, and the men. And now and then a merchant riding in the shade of a small awning. The whole long line moves at the pace of the slowest animal, which is to say the pace of a man walking gently, and it covers, in a long day, perhaps 20 miles, and then it stops at a well or at a walled rest house, and the loads come off, and the animals are watered, and the men make their fire, and the night passes, and in the cold grey morning the loads go back on, and the line forms again, and the road continues. That is the rhythm of the journey, slow, patient, steady as breathing. There is nowhere we have to be by any particular hour, and the road does not care how long it takes us, and so we may go as slowly as we please. Now let your attention rest on the packs themselves, on the careful loads slung on either side of the patient animals, because those packs are the reason for the whole journey, and they are the reason we are here. Some of the packs hold silk, the long shining bolts of woven silk that gave the road one of its names, wrapped in oiled cloth against the dust. Some hold jade, and porcelain wrapped in straw, and worked bronze, and lacquer and paper that wonderful new thing, paper, light and strong, that the road would carry slowly westward to change the world. But a great many of the packs, more than a stranger might guess, hold medicine. They hold dried roots and dried barks and dried leaves and dried seeds, sealed against the damp. They hold hard, fragrant lumps of resin and gum. They hold small, heavy stoppered jars of precious oil, and small linen bags of costly powder, and small wooden boxes lined with wax to keep the moisture out. And now and then, packed with great care in the very center of a load, where it cannot be jostled, a tiny sealed flask of something so precious that a single flask might be worth more than the camel that carries it. The caravan is, when you look at it in this way, a moving apothecary's shop, a long line of shelves on legs, carrying the cures of the east slowly toward the west, and the cures of the west slowly toward the east. And at every market along the way the loads are opened, and some goods are sold, and others are bought, so that the medicines of the world are forever being mixed and traded and carried on, hand to hand, market to market, all the long length of the road. That is what we are going to follow tonight. We are going to follow the medicine. We will begin here at the Eastern Gate, in the city where so many of these goods are gathered before the journey west, and we will learn the remedies of this eastern land. Then we will climb with the caravan up onto the high cold roof of the world and learn the remedies of the mountain people. Then we will come down into the Oasis cities where the deserts part and the wells are deep and the markets are loud with a dozen languages, and learn what is traded there. Then we will go on into the gardens of the great western kingdom of roses and fountains, and learn the gentle distilled remedies of its physicians. Then we will cross the high southern passes into the warm green land of many rivers, and learn the golden remedies of its ancient healers. Then we will follow the road to the great river, city of the western caliphs, where the learning of the whole world was gathered into one place, and learn how the druggists there perfected the art. And at the last, we will come down to the warm inland sea, at the western end of everything, where the goods of the road are loaded onto ships, and where all the medicines of the journey are at last brought together in one great bowl into the most famous remedy of the old world. That is the shape of the night. Do not try to hold it all in your mind. Let it come to you slowly, one market at a time, the way it came to the traders, the way it would come to you if you truly walked this road, a little each day, with no thought of the end. So let the caravan finish forming. Let the last loads be lashed tight. Let the lead camel, an old grey beast with a small bronze bell at its throat, take its first slow swaying step out through the dark tunnel of the gate and into the grey morning beyond. Let the bell ring once, softly, and then again, and then settle into its slow, patient rhythm, one note for every long stride, as the whole line begins at last to move. We are leaving the city. The road is opening before us, and the first thing we must do before we walk too far is to look back, just once, at the great market of the city we are leaving, and learn the remedies that are being packed, even now, into the loads of our caravan. The city behind us is the eastern capital, the greatest city in the world in its day, a city of perhaps 1 million souls behind its long earth walls, laid out in a great grid of avenues so wide that 9 carts could ride abreast down the central way, divided into walled wards that closed their gates at dusk. ruled by an emperor in a palace of vermilion pillars and yellow tile at the northern end of the grid. It is a city that has drawn to itself, along this very road, the people and the goods of half the world, so that in its great markets you might see, on a single morning, a merchant from the western kingdoms in a long robe, a monk from the southern mountains with a shaved head and a saffron robe, a trader from the steppe in furs and leather, a scholar in the dark gown of the official class, and a country herb gatherer with a basket of fresh, dug roots still dark with the soil of the hills. And in the medicine market, in one quiet quarter of the city, the air is heavy with the mingled smell of 1,000 dried plants, and the stalls are piled high with the materia of the Eastern art. And it is here, before we follow the road too far west, that we must begin, for it is here that the first and the most precious of all our remedies is weighed out and wrapped, and packed into the loads. The first remedy is the root. In every great medicine market of the Eastern land, the most honored stall, the stall that draws the wealthiest customers, and the most careful bargaining, is the stall of the root seller. And the root above all roots, the king of the Eastern pharmacy, is the slow pale forked root that the Eastern people call by a name that means, more or less, the man root, because the best and oldest examples of it grow into a shape that is uncannily like the body of a small person, with a thick body and 2 divided legs, and sometimes a pair of arms, and a small rounded head, a little pale figure of a man pulled living from the dark soil of the cold northern forests. We know it in the West by another name, but tonight, on the road, let us call it by what it is, the man root. The root that the Eastern physicians held, above every other thing in their long cupboard, to restore the deep vital warmth of a body worn thin by age or illness or long sorrow. The man root grows wild in the cold mountain forests of the far north and east, in the deep leaf shade beneath the old trees, where the soil is dark and the air is cool and the winters are long, and it grows with a patience that is hard for a hurried mind even to imagine, for the wild root may take 6 years, or 10 years, or 20 years, or in the oldest and most precious examples 100 years and more, to grow to the size of a man's finger. It does not hurry. It sits in the cold dark soil, year after year, sending up each spring a small cluster of leaves, and a small head of pale flowers, and a small cluster of bright red berries, and then dying back each autumn to the root, and growing all the while, so slowly that a whole human life might pass beside it in the forest, and the root would be only a little larger at the end of that life than it had been at the beginning. The gatherers of the man root are a particular and a secretive people, who walk the deep forests in the autumn, when the bright red berries make the plant easy to see among the fading leaves, and who, when they find an old and a worthy root, do not simply pull it from the ground, but dig around it for a whole day, with small wooden tools and with their bare, careful fingers, so that not the smallest hair of the long, fragile root is broken in the lifting. For a man root lifted whole and unbroken is worth many times a man root lifted in pieces. Once lifted, the root is cleaned very gently of its soil, and then it is dried, and the drying is itself a careful art. The finest roots are dried slowly in the shade, or steamed first and then dried, by which they take on a darker, redder, more translucent color, and are reckoned warmer in their nature and stronger in their effect. The dried roots are then sorted, with enormous care, by size and by age and by shape, and by the perfection of their form, and the very finest, the oldest and the most perfectly shaped and the most unbroken, are wrapped each one alone in soft paper, and packed each one alone in a small lined box. And these are the routes that travel in the very heart of the caravan loads, west along the road, to be sold in the far markets for a price that would buy a house. What did the man root do in the long belief of the Eastern physicians? It restored, they said, the deep root energy of the body, the warm vital force that the Eastern art held to be stored in the lower body and slowly spent across a lifetime, and that ran low in the old, in the sick, in the exhausted, in those worn thin by too much work or too much grief or too long a winter. A thin slice of the root, simmered very slowly for many hours in a small covered pot of water, made a pale fragrant broth that was given, by the spoonful, to a person recovering from a long fever, or to an old man whose strength was failing, or to a scholar grey and exhausted from the long examinations, or to a new mother weak from a hard birth, and the broth was believed to gather up the scattered strength of the body and to settle it back down into its deep root, slowly, gently, over many days. The Eastern physicians did not give it for a sudden trouble. They gave it for the long, slow rebuilding of a body that had been emptied. It was a remedy of patience, given over weeks, taken in the quiet mornings, and it suited in its slowness the whole slow, patient temper of the Eastern art, which held that the body, like a garden, is not mended in a day, but tended, season by season, back into its health. So the root seller weighs out, for our caravan, a small lined box of the finest dried man roots and seals it, and the merchant of our caravan packs it with his own hands into the very center of a load, where the swaying of the long journey cannot bruise it, and the first and the most precious of all our remedies is aboard, and we may walk on a little further, down the long row of stalls in the medicine market, before the caravan moves off in earnest, and learn the next of the Eastern cures. The second remedy of the Eastern market is the mountain joint fir. A few stalls along from the route, seller stands a quieter, plainer stall, hung with bundles of what looks, to the untrained eye, like dry green broom, like the stiff jointed stems of some thin desert shrub, tied in small bundles and stacked in careful piles. This is the mountain joint fir, a low stiff shrub with thin green jointed stems and almost no leaves at all, that grows on the dry stony hillsides and the cold high steps at the edges of the Eastern land, in the harsh places where little else will grow, and that the Eastern physicians had used for a great span of centuries as one of their most reliable remedies for the cold and the cough and the stopped and laboring breath. The stems are gathered in the late autumn, when their virtue is reckoned to be at its fullest, and they are dried in the wind and the thin sun, and tied in bundles, and brought down to the markets, and a small handful of the dried jointed stems, simmered into a hot bitter tea, was the Eastern remedy for the man who came in from the cold with a tight chest and a streaming head and a hard dry cough that would not loosen, for the tea, taken hot, opened the breath and warmed the body from within, and brought a light sweat to the cold skin, and was held to drive the cold trouble up and out of the body the way a warm wind clears a valley of its morning mist. It was a brisk remedy. The joint fir, brisker than most in the gentle Eastern cupboard, for it quickened the heart a little, and lifted the spirits and chased away the heavy dullness of a head thick with cold. And the careful physicians gave it with respect, and did not give it to the very old, or to those with a racing heart already, and did not give it late in the day. For a man who drank the hot bitter tea of the joint, fur in the evening, might find himself lying awake in the dark, with his thoughts running too quick for sleep. It was a morning remedy, a remedy for the working man who had a long cold day ahead and a chest too tight to face it. And across the long centuries it served the people of the dry eastern hills faithfully, and it travels with us now, a few small bundles packed into a load, jointed and green and faintly bitter, the second of our eastern cures. The third remedy is the great yellow root. Here is a remedy that would travel further along this road than almost any other, that would be carried west and west and west until it reached the markets at the very far end of the world, and was so prized there, and so associated with the land it came from, that the Western peoples would name it in their own tongues, simply after the East, the great root from the eastern land. It is a thick, heavy root, the color of old gold, of a tall, broad-leaved plant that grows in the cold, high country of the western mountains of the eastern land. And the eastern physicians called it the Great Yellow, and held it to be one of the most useful and most necessary remedies in the whole cupboard, for it was the great gentle clearing remedy, the remedy for the body grown heavy and clogged and slow, for the long blocked gut, for the foul stagnation that the Eastern art believed lay beneath so many fevers and so many heavinesses of the body and the mind. The root is dug in the cold months, when its strength has drawn down into it, and it is cleaned and cut into thick pieces and dried, sometimes over a slow fire, sometimes in the high cold air, and the dried pieces are heavy and dense and marbled when broken, with veins of bright yellow and rich brown, and they have a strange astringent bitterness and a faint, not unpleasant smell of the deep earth. A small careful dose of the great yellow root, simmered briefly into a dark tea, was the Eastern remedy for the gut that had grown sluggish and stopped, for the body that felt heavy and clogged and feverish and sour. And it worked, the physicians said, by clearing away the old stagnant matter and letting the body move freely again, the way a gardener clears a blocked channel and lets the water run. It was given carefully, in small amounts, for it was a strong remedy and a forceful one, and the physicians watched the dose closely, and gave less to the weak, and the old and more to the strong, and held that the great yellow, rightly given, could break a stubborn fever, lighten a heavy body, and clear a clouded head, all by the one gentle clearing action. When this root reached the far western markets, after its long journey along the very road we are walking, it became one of the most valuable medicines in the Western world, worth, at times, many times its weight in costly metals, and the Western merchants made fortunes carrying it, and the Western physicians prescribed it eagerly, and for many long centuries the secret of where exactly it grew, and how exactly it was prepared, remained a closely held mystery of the Eastern trade, so that the Western buyers knew only that the great golden clearing root came, somehow, from the distant East, along the long road in the loads of caravans like ours. And so a good supply of it goes into our loads now, the heavy golden pieces wrapped against the damp, the third and one of the most far-traveling of all our Eastern cures. The fourth remedy is the sweet root that harmonizes, There is one more route we must take from the eastern market before we let the caravan move on, and it is a humble one, a cheap one, a route that no merchant would grow rich on. And yet it is the route that the Eastern physicians reached for more often than almost any other, for it is the great harmonizer, the root that is added to 100 other remedies to soften their harshness and to draw their separate virtues into one gentle whole. It is the sweet root, a long woody root of a small leguminous plant of the dry northern steppes, and it is genuinely and surprisingly sweet, far sweeter than sugar, so that a small chip of it held in the mouth fills the whole mouth with a deep mild sweetness that lingers for a long time. The Eastern physicians added a little of the sweet root to a great many of their compound remedies, not so much for any single power of its own, though it soothed a sore throat and eased a cough and settled a troubled stomach, but rather for its gift of harmony, its gift of drawing the other ingredients of a remedy together, of softening the bitter ones and tempering the strong ones, and making the whole mixture gentle and agreeable to the body, the way a wise and quiet person in a room of quarreling voices can, by their mere mild presence, draw the whole room into a calmer mood. And so the sweet root went into nearly everything, and a good store of it goes into our loads now, the fourth of our Eastern cures, and with it the saddlebags of the Eastern leg are nearly full. Let me name, more quickly now, as the caravan begins truly to move, and the Eastern market falls behind us, a few of the other Eastern goods that go into the loads, so that you may have them in your mind as we climb away from this first land. There is cinnamon, or rather its near cousin, the dried inner bark of a small warm tree of the southern reaches of the eastern land, rolled into fragrant quills, warming and sweet, used for a cold stomach and a chilled body, and added, for its warmth and its sweetness, to many a remedy and many a dish. There is the dried peel of a small bitter orange, saved and aged until it grows fragrant and faintly bitter, and used to lift a heavy stomach, and to move a stuck and sluggish digestion, and to ease the bloated fullness that follows a heavy meal. A humble and a constant remedy of the Eastern kitchen and the Eastern cupboard alike. There is dried ginger, the warm pungent rhizome that grows in the warm wet south, both the fresh kind, scrubbed and sliced, and the dried kind, harder and hotter and more concentrated, used everywhere and always for the cold and the chill and the queasy stomach and the cold ache of the joints in the damp season. And there is a small, careful store of star-shaped dried pods, the fruit of a small evergreen tree of the warm south, 8, pointed and fragrant with a deep, sweet, warming scent, used to settle the stomach and warm the body and freshen the breath, and prized for its perfect shape as much as for its use. All of these go into the loads, the man root in its lined box at the heart of the caravan, the bundles of joint fir, the heavy golden pieces of the great clearing root, the sweet harmonizing root, the fragrant bark and the bitter peel, and the warm ginger, and the star-shaped pods, and the saddlebags of the Eastern leg are full now, full of the careful cures of the Eastern art, an art that held, above all, that the body is a slow garden to be tended, and not a broken thing to be forced, that warmth and patience and gentle clearing and careful harmony are the great principles of healing, and that the wise physician moves slowly and watches closely and trusts the body's own deep wish to mend. And now the road turns away from the city and begins, very slowly, to climb. For a long time, for many days that we will pass over gently, the road runs west through a narrowing corridor of dry land, between bare brown mountains on the one side and a great cold desert on the other, past a line of old watch towers and crumbling earthen walls that the Eastern emperors built long ago to guard this narrow gate of their kingdom against the riders of the steppe. And the caravan moves through this corridor in its slow, patient rhythm, day after day, the bell of the lead camel ringing softly in the great silence of the dry land, and the loads swaying gently, and the men walking quietly beside the animals, and the nights very cold and very clear and very full of stars. And then, where the corridor at last opens out, the road forks, and the greater part of the caravan trade goes on westward toward the Oasis cities, which we shall come to in good time. But we are going to take, first, a smaller branch of the road, a harder and a higher branch, that turns away to the south and climbs up out of the dry corridor and onto the great cold roof of the world, to the high plateau where a particular people, in their thin cold air, had built one of the most careful and one of the most beautiful healing traditions in the whole history of the world. So let us turn our patient animals to the south and begin to climb and feel the air grow thinner and colder and cleaner around us, and the land grow vast and bare and shining as we make our slow way up toward the roof of the world. The climb is long and slow and steep, and the air grows thin, so that the men and the animals must stop often to rest and to breathe. And the caravan that climbs onto the high plateau is a smaller and a tougher caravan than the great trains that keep to the lowland road. For only the hardiest animals and the most patient men will face the cold and the height and the long, thin, aired passes. As we climb, the green falls away below us, and then the trees, and then even the low shrubs, until there is nothing around us but the great bare shining land of the high plateau, a land of brown and gold and grey rolling up to white mountains on every far horizon, a land so high that the sky above it is a deep dark blue even at midday, and so still that you can hear across great distances the single far cry of a bird or the small bell of a distant flock. The air here is so thin and so clean that it seems to have a taste, a cold, bright mineral taste, and the light is so pure and so strong that everything stands out sharp and clear and close, the far mountains looking near enough to touch, the clouds throwing their slow blue shadows across the endless golden land. It is one of the most beautiful and one of the most demanding places in the world, and the people who live here, in their black tents and their low stone houses and their high white, walled monasteries, had learned, over many long centuries, how to keep a body alive and well in the cold, thin air, and had gathered that learning into a healing tradition that is one of the quiet wonders of the old world. And it is to that tradition and to the remedies of the roof of the world that we now turn. The healing tradition of the roof of the world is called, in the language of its people, by a name that means, more or less, the science of healing, and it is a tradition that gathered into itself, over the long centuries, the learning of all its neighbors, the warm, patient root, medicine of the eastern land to the one side, the golden spice, medicine of the great river, country to the other side, and even carried up the long road, faint echoes of the humor, medicine of the far western world, and wove them all together with the deep, quiet thought of the mountain people's own faith into a single careful art. The great founder of this tradition, the man the mountain people honor as the father of their medicine, was a physician and a teacher who lived in the early centuries of the tradition and who gathered the scattered learning of his people into the great root text of the art, a long and careful book set out in the manner of his people as a kind of garden in which the whole of medicine is pictured as a great tree with roots and trunk and branches and leaves, each root a part of the art, each branch a kind of disease, each leaf a sign or a symptom or a remedy, so that a student might learn the whole vast tradition by learning, leaf by leaf, the great medical tree. It is a beautiful way to hold a body of knowledge, the tree growing and branching and leafing in the mind, and it suited the deep, patient, contemplative temper of the mountain people, who held that the healer must be, before all else, a person of calm and of compassion, a person who has quieted their own mind before they presume to quiet the suffering of another. The first and the greatest remedy of the roof of the world is the king of medicines. In every cupboard, in every monastery dispensary, in every healer's small store of remedies across the whole high plateau, there is one fruit that is honored above all others. That is called, plainly and without exaggeration, the king of medicines, and that is held by the mountain physicians to be the single most useful and most complete remedy in the whole of their art. It is a small dried fruit, a little larger than a date, brown and ridged and hard, the dried fruit of a tall tree that grows not on the high plateau itself, where no such tree could live, but in the warm green valleys far below, from which it is carried up along the mountain paths to the cold high country where it is so prized. The mountain physicians revered this fruit because, they said, it held within itself all of the tastes, all of the qualities that medicine knows, the sweet and the sour and the salt, and the bitter and the hot and the astringent, all gathered into one small fruit, so that the king of medicines was, by itself, a complete remedy, balancing and gathering and harmonizing the body in a single thing, useful in nearly every trouble, gentle enough to give to almost anyone. The one fruit that a healer traveling far from home, with only a small store of remedies in a bag, would carry above all others, for with it alone they could meet a great many of the troubles they might find along the way. The fruit is prepared with great care. The hard outer flesh is what is used, and the small hard stone within is removed and set aside, for it is held to be the unwholesome part, and the dried flesh is ground, or simmered, or soaked, depending on the trouble it is meant to treat, and is given for the heavy clogged gut, for the sour stomach, for the fever, for the failing strength, for the cleansing of the body, for the calming of the troubled spirit, and for the long, slow building back of a body worn thin by the cold and the height and the hard life of the plateau. So central is this fruit to the whole tradition that the mountain people picture even their healing teacher, the gentle physician figure of their faith, holding in his hand a branch of the tree that bears it, the king of medicines, offering its complete and balancing virtue to all the suffering of the world. And so the very first thing our caravan takes on, here on the roof of the world, is a good store of the dried king of medicines, and you may hold in your mind, as we travel on, the small brown ridged fruit that holds, the mountain people said, all the tastes and all the cures of the world within its single small body. The second remedy of the high plateau is the precious red thread. You will remember far back at the eastern gate that we did not take on, in the eastern market, the slender red threads of the autumn, flowering crocus, that most costly of all spices and medicines. And that is because we are taking it here, high on the plateau, where it is one of the most valued of all the remedies, carried up the long mountain paths from the warm lands to the south and west, and treasured above almost anything for its color, its scent, and its gentle warming and gladdening power. The red thread is the dried stigma of a small purple flower, and each flower yields only 3 of the slender threads, so that a great field of the purple flowers, gathered by hand in the cool dawns of the autumn, yields only a small, precious handful of the dried red threads, and it takes many thousands of the flowers, each one stooped over and picked by a patient hand, to make a single small weight of the spice, which is why it has been, for the whole of its long history, worth its weight in gold and more. The mountain physicians used the red thread, dissolved in warm water or in warm milk, where its color bloomed out into a deep glowing gold, for the heavy and sorrowful heart, for the body cold and pale and weak, for the woman's troubles, and above all for the lifting of a low and a grieving spirit, for the red thread was held to be a remedy of gladness, a remedy that warmed not only the body but the mood, that brought a little gold-colored warmth back into a life gone grey and cold, and it was given in the smallest pinch, for it was so precious to those whose sadness had settled too deep and too long, to draw them gently back toward the light. The third remedy of the high plateau is the deep animal musk. There is a small shy deer that lives in the high cold forests at the edges of the plateau, and the male of this deer carries, in a small pouch beneath its belly, a dark waxy substance of an extraordinarily deep and penetrating and lasting fragrance, a fragrance so strong that the smallest trace of it perfumes a whole room and clings to cloth for years. And this substance, the deep animal musk, was one of the most valued of all the goods of the mountain trade, prized both as the base of the costliest perfumes and as a powerful remedy of the mountain physicians. They used it, in the very smallest amounts, for the body that had grown cold and still and unresponsive, for the failing heart, for the deep cold troubles that seemed to have reached the very center of the body. For the musk was held to be the most penetrating and the most reviving of all substances, able to reach where nothing else could reach, and to stir a warmth back into the deepest cold places of the body. It was so precious and so easily counterfeited that the careful physicians learned 100 ways to test a true musk from a false one, by its smell, by its taste, by the way it dissolved, by the way a single grain of it would scent a whole bowl of water, and the true musk, packed in its small sealed flask, was among the most valuable single things in any caravan load, and a small careful store of it goes now into ours. Let me name, more gently now, as the wind blows cold and clean across the great golden plateau and the white mountains shine on every horizon, a few of the other mountain remedies that the caravan takes on here before we begin the long descent. There are the strange and the precious mineral medicines of the high country, the substances that ooze, in the warm months, from the rocks of certain high cliffs, a dark sticky tar-like substance that the mountain people gather with great care and purify with great patience, washing it and straining it many times over, and that they hold to be one of the great strengthening and rejuvenating remedies of their whole art, a substance born, they said, of the very rocks of the mountains, carrying the strength of the stone itself into the body of a person worn thin by the hard, high life. There are the high cold herbs that grow only in the thin air above the tree line, small tough fragrant plants pressed close to the cold ground, gathered in the brief mountain summer and dried for the long winter, each with its careful use, for the cough, for the chill, for the headache of the height, for the slow wound that will not heal in the cold, dry air. And there are the great compound remedies of the mountain tradition, the precious pills, in which many costly ingredients, the spices and the minerals and the rare herbs, and sometimes the smallest careful trace of the precious metals themselves, are ground together and bound and rolled by hand with long prayer and long care into small dark round pills, each one holding the gathered virtue of many ingredients, each one wrapped in colored silk, each one a small treasure, given to the very sick and the very weak as the strongest and the most complete remedy that the whole tradition could compound. A small store of these, in their colored silk wrappings, goes into the most carefully guarded load of the caravan, and the saddlebags of the high plateau are full. And so we may turn our patient animals back to the north and the west, and begin the long slow descent from the roof of the world, down out of the thin cold shining air, down past the high herbs and the tree line and the first low shrubs, down into the warmer thicker air of the lower land, with the king of medicines and the red thread and the deep musk and the mineral tars and the high herbs and the precious silk, wrapped pills all safely packed into the loads, carrying with us the quiet wisdom of the mountain art, which held, above all the rest, that the healer must first be calm and kind, that the body and the mind and the spirit are one single thing and must be healed together, and that even the smallest fruit, rightly understood, may hold within it all the tastes and all the cures of the whole wide world. The descent is long, but the body grows easier as the air thickens and the breath comes deeper, and a kind of warmth and softness returns to the land. And after many days the caravan comes down at last out of the mountains and back onto the great Westward road, the main road, the road we left to make our climb, and rejoins the slow river of the caravan trade flowing west across the dry heart of the continent toward the Oasis cities. And the next thing we must do, now that we are back on the great road and moving west again through the dry land, is to look ahead to where far off across the brown emptiness, a green smudge is beginning to show on the horizon, a smudge of green that means trees, and trees mean water, and water means a city, an oasis city, one of the great market cities of the deep desert, where the caravan roads cross, and the wells are deep, and the languages of half the world are spoken in the loud crowded shade of the bazaar. Let us go on, then, toward the green smudge on the horizon, and learn what the caravan trades, and what remedies it gathers in the oasis cities where the sands part. The green smudge on the horizon grows, hour by hour, as the caravan draws near, until it resolves into the long dark line of poplars and the silver shimmer of irrigation channels, and the pale flat roofs of a city set down in the desert like a green island in a sea of brown. And the tired animals lift their heads and quicken their slow pace a little, for they smell the water, and the men grow lighter and louder, for they smell the rest, and at last The road runs in beneath the gateway of the city wall and into the cool green shade of the streets, and the caravan has come, after the long dry crossing, into one of the great Oasis cities of the road. These Oasis cities were the beads upon the long string of the road, set down wherever a river ran from the mountains, or a spring rose from the deep ground, or a careful people had dug their long underground channels to draw the buried water of the hills out across the thirsty land, and around the precious water they had built their gardens and their orchards and their walled towns. And where the caravan roads crossed at such a place, a great market grew, and the city grew rich, not on what it made, for it made little, but on what passed through it, the goods of the whole road changing hands in its crowded bazaars, the languages of the whole continent mingling in its loud, crowded lanes. To walk into the bazaar of a great Oasis city was to walk into the meeting place of the world, where a trader from the far east haggled with a trader from the far west over a bale of goods that had come halfway across the earth, where the gold of the south was weighed against the furs of the north, where the silk of the east was traded for the glass of the west, and where, in the quiet, shaded corners given over to the drug trade, the medicines of every land along the road were spread out together on the one set of stalls, the eastern roots beside the southern spices, beside the western resins, so that the drug bazaar of an Oasis city was, all by itself, a kind of summary of the whole pharmacy of the world. The first remedy of the Oasis cities is the resin of the steppe. There is a stall in the drug bazaar that announces itself from a long way off by its smell, a strong, pungent, oniony, almost overpowering smell that hangs in the air around the stall and clings to the hands of the seller and the cloth of the buyer. And this is the stall of the great resin of the steppe, a yellowish, brown gum that oozes from the cut root of a tall, coarse plant of the dry high steppes to the north and west, and that the peoples of the road, from the east to the west, prized both as a powerful medicine and as a strange and valued flavoring for their food. The raw resin smells so strongly, so sharply, so unpleasantly even to many a nose, that a stranger might wonder how anyone could bear to use it, and yet, cooked gently in oil or fat, the harsh smell softens and mellows into something deep and savory and almost pleasant, and a tiny pinch of it transforms a whole pot of food, and the cooks of the Oasis cities and the lands beyond used it with care and with skill in their long, simmered dishes. As a medicine, the resin of the steppe was held to be one of the great remedies for the troubled and the windy and the griping gut, for the stomach knotted with spasm, for the bloated and the colicky belly, for the wind that would not move, and a tiny amount of it, dissolved in warm water, was given to settle and to soothe, and to relax the cramping gut, and to let the trapped wind pass, and the knotted muscles ease, and it was held, too, to clear the chest of a stubborn cough, and to drive off the small spirits of disease that the older folk belief blamed for many troubles, so that a little of the resin was sometimes hung in a small bag about the neck of a child, as much for the warding off of trouble as for any direct effect. Its strong smell a kind of invisible wall against the unseen ills of the world. A good store of the pungent resin of the steppe, sealed well against its own strong smell, goes into our loads, the first of the Oasis cures. The second remedy of the Oasis cities is the small dark seed of the caravan kitchen. In the cooking, quarter of the bazaar, where the air is sweet and savory with the smoke of 100 small cooking fires, and the great cauldrons of the caravanserai bubble slowly over their coals. There is a constant trade in the small fragrant seeds that flavor the food of the road, and that serve, at the same time, as the everyday gentle medicines of the traveling life. And chief among these is a small ridged brown seed of a warm, earthy, aromatic scent, which the cooks of the road threw by the handful into their pots of meat, and their pots of beans, and their flat breads, and which the wise traveller also kept by him as a remedy, for the seed, chewed after a heavy meal, or steeped into a warm tea, settled the over-full stomach, eased the bloating and the wind, warmed a cold belly, and quieted the griping that so often troubled men who ate strange food in strange lands along the road. It was the great friend of the travelling stomach, this small earthy seed, and beside it on the stalls lay its many cousins and companions, the small sweet seeds, and the small bitter seeds, and the small warm seeds of a dozen different plants, each one both a flavor for the pot and a gentle medicine for the gut, the seeds of fennel for the wind, and the sweet breath, the seeds of coriander for the cooling of a hot stomach, the small black seeds that the people of the road scattered on their breads, and held to be a remedy for almost everything, a remedy of which it was said, in a saying that travelled the whole length of the road, that it was a cure for every illness except the one that no cure can mend. A good mixed store of all these small fragrant kitchen seeds goes into our loads, the everyday medicine of the caravan, the second of the Oasis cures. The third remedy of the Oasis cities is the dried fruit of the long-lived valleys. There are, hidden among the high dry mountains that ring the Oasis cities, certain sheltered green valleys, watered by the snow, melt of the peaks above, where the orchards grow thick and the people are famous, all along the road, for living to a very great age, for keeping their strength and their teeth, and their good cheer far into their long lives. And the fruit of these valleys, above all the small golden sun, dried fruit of a particular orchard tree, was traded all along the road both as a sweet and as a kind of gentle health, giving food, eaten by the handful by travellers, and by the sick and by the old, and held to keep the body strong, and the bowel easy, and the blood sweet, and the long years kind. With the golden dried fruit travelled the small dried grapes of the same warm valleys, and the dried mulberries, and the dried slices of the great sweet melons for which the Oasis cities were famous across the whole world, melons so sweet and so fragrant that the rulers of distant lands sent for them by fast courier, packed in ice and lead, and that the people of the Oasis dried in long, sweet, leathery strips to carry the taste of the summer through the long, cold winter. These were not medicines in the sharp sense, not remedies for a particular trouble, but they were the gentle health foods of the road, the sweet, strengthening things that a wise traveller ate to keep the long journey from wearing the body down, and a good store of them, sweet and golden and light, goes into our loads. The third of the Oasis comforts, let me name, as the evening falls over the Oasis city, and the lamps are lit in the deep shaded lanes of the bazaar, and the cooking fires send up their fragrant smoke into the cooling air, a few more of the goods that change hands here, where the medicines of the whole road meet on the one set of stalls. There is the trade in the eastern routes, the man route and the great golden clearing route, brought this far west by caravans like ours and sold on, here, to the merchants who will carry them further still. There is the trade in the southern spices, the pepper and the ginger and the cardamom. Come up from the warm green river country to the south and sold on to the west. There is the trade in the western resins and the western glass and the western coins, come east from the inland sea. There is the great trade in the precious blue stone of the southern mountains, ground, in part, for a costly blue cosmetic and a costly blue pigment, but used also, in the old belief, as a remedy for the troubled eye and the melancholy heart. And there is, in every Oasis bazaar, the quiet trade in the small comforts of the travelling life, the sleeping draughts for the man who cannot rest after the long day's march, the gentle teas for the headache and the chill, the small pots of soothing salve for the cracked lips and the sun, burned skin and the saddle, galled body, all the small kind remedies that ease the hard life of the road, and a good store of these, too. The small kind comforts goes into our loads, and so, with the saddlebags full of the pungent steppe resin, and the fragrant kitchen seeds, and the sweet dried fruit, and the small kind comforts of the road, we rest one more night in the cool green shade of the Oasis city, and let the animals graze in the watered meadows, and let the men sit late by the fires of the caravanserai, telling the long slow stories of the road. And then in the cold clear dawn, we load the patient animals once more and pass out through the western gate of the Oasis city and turn our faces toward the next great land along the road, the land of gardens and fountains and roses and learned physicians, the great western kingdom where the slow art of distillation was carried to its height and the gentle sweet syrups of the physicians were first compounded, and where some of the most beautiful remedies of the whole long road were made. So let us go on west and a little south, across the next stretch of dry land, toward the green and watered kingdom of the rose. The road from the Oasis cities to the kingdom of the rose runs first across a high, cold plateau, and then down through a series of brown folded hills, and then at last into a broad green valley, where a river runs clear and quick from the snows of a great mountain range, and where, as the caravan comes down out of the dry hills into the watered land, a change comes over everything, for here is a land that has made, of the very growing of beautiful and useful plants, an art and a glory and a way of life. Here the roads are lined with tall dark cypress trees. Here the houses turn their backs to the dusty street and open within onto cool green walled gardens where fountains play and channels of clear water run in straight lines between beds of flowers and rows of fruit, trees and arbors heavy with the vine. Here the very kings built, as the greatest of all their works, not fortresses and not temples only, but gardens, vast and beautiful walled gardens, divided by their water, channels into 4 green quarters, planted with every flower and every fruit and every fragrant herb that the wide world could furnish, gardens that were, to the people of this land, a picture on earth of the garden of paradise itself. And in such a land, where the growing of plants was the highest of the arts, the medicine of plants reached a particular height and a particular beauty, and it is to that gentle garden medicine and to the remedies of the kingdom of the rose that we now come. The kingdom of the rose was, for the whole of its long history, a meeting place of medicines as much as the Oasis cities had been. But it was more than a meeting place. For here the physicians did not merely trade the remedies of other lands, they took them and studied them and improved upon them, and wove the learning of the East and the learning of the far West into a single great tradition of their own, and they wrote it all down in long careful books, in the slow beautiful flowing script of their language, so that the medicine of this kingdom became, in time, one of the most learned and most complete in the whole world, the bridge across which the healing wisdom of the East passed to the West, and the healing wisdom of the West passed to the East. The great physicians of this land were not only healers, but philosophers and astronomers and poets, men of vast and patient learning, and the greatest of them wrote books so complete, so careful, so well ordered, that they were copied and translated and studied in every land along the road and far beyond it, for many hundreds of years, and were taught in the schools of distant kingdoms long after the kingdom that produced them had passed through many changes. And the heart of this kingdom's medicine, the thing it was most famous for, the thing it had perfected above all others, was the gentle art of drawing the healing virtue of a plant out of the plant and into a clear, sweet liquid, the art of the distilled water, and the art of the medicinal syrup. And it is with these, the gentle waters and the gentle syrups, that we shall fill the saddlebags of this leg of the road. The first remedy of the kingdom of the rose is the rose itself. In the late spring, across the high valleys of this kingdom, there bloom, for a few short weeks, vast fields of a particular small pink rose, a rose grown not for its beauty alone, but for the extraordinary richness of its scent. And in those few short weeks the whole life of the valleys turns to the gathering of the roses, for they must be picked in the cool of the very early morning, before the sun has risen high enough to draw the precious scent up out of the petals and away into the warm air. And so, in the grey dawns of the rose weeks, the whole population of the valleys goes out into the fields and picks, by hand, basket after basket of the cool dew, wet petals, and carries them quickly, before the scent can fade, to the stills. And there, in the still houses of the kingdom, the petals are placed in great rounded copper vessels with water, and the vessels are sealed and set over a slow, gentle fire, and as the water heats, the fragrant steam rises, carrying with it the very soul of the rose, the scent and the gentle virtue of the petals, and the steam passes up into a long curving neck, and over, and down through a coil that runs through a trough of cool water, where the steam, cooling, turns back into a clear, fragrant liquid, drop by slow drop, and runs out at the end into a waiting vessel. And this clear, fragrant liquid, this water that holds the captured soul of the rose, is the rosewater, one of the most beautiful and most useful and most beloved remedies in the whole of the kingdom's art. The making of this fragrant water by the slow, gentle drawing of the plant's virtue up in steam and down again in cooling, was the great gift of this kingdom's physicians to the whole world's medicine. For though the rough beginnings of the art were old, it was here in the kingdom of the rose that the gentle vessels were perfected, and the careful method was written down, and the art was raised from a rough trick to a precise and a beautiful science. And the physicians of this land, having learned to capture the soul of the rose, went on to capture the soul of 100 other plants in the same way. The orange flower and the violet and the mint and the willow flower and the fragrant herbs of the garden each one yielding to the slow, gentle steam its own clear, fragrant, healing water. And the rosewater itself was used for everything, for it was held to be cooling and gladdening, and gently strengthening, sprinkled on the hot brow of the feverish, given by the spoonful for the troubled heart, and the low spirits, dropped into the sore and reddened eye, mixed into 100 other remedies for its scent and its soothing virtue, used to wash the face and to perfume the hands, and to scent the cool halls of the great houses, and reckoned, above all, a remedy for the heart in both its meanings, for the labouring heart within the chest, and for the grieving heart of the sorrowing person, so that a person sunk in sadness might be given a cup of cool water scented with the rose, and might feel, with its fragrance, a little gladness steal back into the grey day. A good store of rosewater, in well-sealed flasks, and of the precious oil that floats, in the tiniest quantity, atop the water of the still, goes into the most carefully packed of our loads, the first and the most beautiful of the remedies of the kingdom of the rose. The second remedy of the kingdom of the rose is the gentle medicinal syrup. The physicians of this kingdom understood, better perhaps than any before them, that a medicine that is pleasant to take is a medicine that the patient will actually take, and that a child, or a sick and unwilling adult who would refuse a bitter draught, will gladly swallow a sweet one. And so they made a great art of the medicinal syrup, the careful blending of the healing virtue of a plant with the sweetness and the preserving power of sugar or of honey into a thick, sweet, pleasant liquid that could be given by the spoonful, that would keep for a long time without spoiling, and that the patient would take gladly and even ask for again. They made a syrup of the rose and a syrup of the violet, gentle and cooling and sweet, given for the hot chest and the dry cough and the feverish child. They made a syrup of the sour pomegranate and a syrup of the sour quince, cooling and astringent, given for the upset and the loose and the over-hot stomach. They made a syrup of the sweet, sour tamarind, gently loosening to a bound gut. They made a syrup of the licorice and of the marshmallow root, soothing to a raw and inflamed throat and chest. They made a syrup of the jujube fruit and of the dried fig, gentle and nourishing for the weak and the wasted. And they made, above all, the great cooling drink that the people of this land loved both as a medicine and as a refreshment, a clear, sweet, sour liquid of fruit and sugar and fragrant water, served cool, sometimes with snow brought down from the mountains and kept through the summer in deep cold cellars, a drink that cooled the fevered body and gladdened the thirsty heart, and that would travel, in time, along this very road to the west, where its very name, in the Western tongues, would come to mean a cool, sweet, frozen treat. A good store of these gentle syrups, thick and sweet, and sealed in their stout little jars, goes into our loads, the second of the remedies of the kingdom of the rose. The third remedy of the kingdom of the rose is the sweet manna of the tamarisk. In the dry hills at the edges of this kingdom, on certain small thorny trees and shrubs in the heat of the summer, there forms a sweet pale sticky substance, a kind of sweet gum or dried honey, dew that the people gathered in the cool of the morning by shaking the branches over a cloth, or by scraping it gently from the twigs, and that they prized as a gentle, sweet laxative remedy, mild enough to give to a child or to a person made delicate by long illness, given to loosen a bound and stubborn gut without the griping and the violence of the stronger remedies, sweet to the taste and gentle in its working. Several different plants of this kingdom and the lands around it gave such a sweet manner, each a little different, each with its own gentle use, and the physicians knew them all and chose among them carefully, and the sweet pale manna, gathered in the summer dawns and dried and pressed into small cakes, was one of the gentlest and kindest of all their remedies, and a good store of it goes into our loads, the third of the remedies of the kingdom of the rose. Let me name, as the fountains play in the cool evening gardens of this kingdom, and the scent of 1,000 roses drifts on the warm air, and the slow water runs in its straight channels between the dark cypress trees. A few more of the remedies and the customs of this gentle garden medicine before we move on. There is the great tradition of the healing houses, the places where the sick were taken in and tended, that this kingdom and its neighbors built and supported as among the finest in the world, places of cool courtyards and running water and quiet gardens, where the patients were fed good food and given clean beds and soothed with music and tended by trained physicians. For the people of this land understood that the body mends best in calm and in cleanliness and in beauty, and that the running of water and the scent of flowers and the sound of gentle music are themselves a kind of medicine for the troubled body and the troubled mind. There is the careful art of the physician's diet, the long patient prescribing of what the patient should eat and drink and avoid, the warm foods and the cooling foods, the moistening foods and the drying foods, by which the physicians of this land, like those of so many lands along the road, sought to bring the humors of the body slowly back into their balance. And there are the great books themselves, the long, careful encyclopedias of the kingdom's physicians, in which the whole of this learning was gathered and ordered and written down, the appearance and the virtue and the preparation of every plant, the cause and the course and the cure of every illness, set out so clearly and so completely that the books became, for many centuries, the very foundation of the medical schools of the whole world, copied and translated and studied in the Far East and the Far West alike. We cannot pack a book into a saddlebag and carry it as a remedy, and yet, in a sense, the whole of the kingdom's medicine, the rosewater and the syrups, and the manna and the careful diet and the gentle healing houses flows out of those books, and we carry, with the remedies, a little of the spirit of them, the spirit of patient learning and gentle care, and the deep belief that beauty and calm are themselves a part of healing. And so, with the saddlebags full of the fragrant rosewater, and the sweet syrups and the gentle manna, and our minds full of the cool green gardens and the playing fountains and the patient learning of the kingdom of the rose, we let the patient animals drink one last time from the clear running channels, and we load them in the cool dawn, and we pass out through the gates of the garden city and turn our faces toward the high passes of the south and the east, toward the next great land along the road, the warm green land of many rivers, the ancient land where the golden remedies were made, and the oldest healing tradition of all was written down, and where the spices grow so thick and so fragrant that the very air of the markets is heavy with their scent. So, let us go on and climb the high southern passes, and come down, on the far side, into the warm wet green of the land of 5 rivers. The high passes of the south are among the hardest of the whole road, for the road must climb over a great wall of mountains, the highest in the world, by a few narrow stony passes that are open only in the warm months, and that are choked with snow and closed for half the year. And the caravan that crosses them is a brave and a patient caravan, walking single file along the narrow tracks above the dizzy gorges, the animals picking their careful way along ledges where a single misstep would be the last, the men leading them slowly, slowly, with soft words, and the cold, thin wind blowing always across the high stone. But the passes are crossed in the end, as all the hard places of the road are crossed, by patience and by care, and by the slow steady putting of one foot before the other, and then the road begins, at last, to descend, and the cold gives way to a growing warmth, and the bare stone gives way to the first green, and then, as the caravan comes lower and lower, the green grows thick and lush and wet, the air grows soft and warm and heavy, and full of strange sweet scents. The streams grow into rivers, the rivers grow broad and brown and slow, and the caravan comes down, at last, out of the high cold passes, and into the warm green river, country of the south, the ancient land of 5 great rivers, the land of the oldest medicine of all. This is a land of an antiquity that is hard for the mind to grasp, a land where people had been living in great cities and writing and trading along this very road for thousands of years before our journey, and where the art of medicine had been studied and ordered and written down in the great old books of the sages longer ago than almost anywhere else on earth. The healers of this land had built, out of that vast antiquity, a complete and a careful science of health, a science whose very name means, in the old tongue of the land, the knowledge of long life, and that taught that health is balance, the balance of 3 great forces or humours within the body, the airy force of movement, the fiery force of heat and change, and the watery force of structure and moisture, and that all illness comes from the disturbance of this balance, and all healing from its gentle restoration by the careful use of diet, of daily routine, of the breath, of the mind, and of the great pharmacy of plants and minerals that this rich green land provided so abundantly. The 2 great old books of this science, written down by sages whose names are still honored, set out. Between them the whole of the art, the one book leaning toward the medicines and the inner treatments, the other toward the surgeon's careful knife, and together they formed a foundation so deep and so complete that the medicine of this land flowed outward, along the very road we are traveling, to the east and to the west alike. The great old books themselves translated, in time, into the tongue of the eastern land, and into the tongue of the western caliphs, so that the healing wisdom of this green river, country watered the medicine of half the world. The first remedy of the land of 5 rivers is the golden root. In the warm wet gardens and fields of this land there grows a low leafy plant with broad green leaves, and beneath the soil the swollen golden rhizome of this plant, dug and boiled and dried and ground into a fine deep golden powder, is one of the most ancient and most honored and most widely used of all the remedies of this land, a powder of so deep and so glowing a gold that it stains everything it touches, the fingers, the cloth, the cooking pot, with its rich warm color. The golden root was used in this land, and had been used for thousands of years, for an enormous range of troubles, but above all it was the great remedy for the wound, and the swelling, and the hot inflamed place, ground into a paste with a little water, and spread upon a cut or a sore or a bruise or a swollen joint to cool the heat and to draw out the trouble and to help the flesh knit clean. And it was taken too by the mouth, stirred into warm milk with a little honey and a pinch of black pepper, a warm golden glowing drink given for the cough and the cold and the troubled chest, for the sluggish liver, for the aching joint, for the body grown heavy and dull, a drink so beloved and so trusted that it was given to the sick and to the well alike, to the strong as a guard against trouble, and to the weak as a slow gentle mending. The golden root was warming in its nature, and bitter and pungent in its taste, and the healers held that it kindled the inner fire of the body, the fire that cooks the food, and clears the channels and burns away the heavy stagnant matter. And so they gave it for whatever was cold and stuck and heavy and slow, and a great store of the deep golden powder, sealed against the damp that would spoil it, goes into our loads. The first, and one of the most ancient of all the remedies of the land of 5 rivers. The second remedy of the land of 5 rivers is the 3 fruits. The healers of this land had a particular love for the compound remedy, the careful blending of several plants into a single mixture whose combined virtue was held to be greater and gentler and more complete than any one of its parts, and the most famous and most beloved of all their compounds, the remedy that nearly every household kept and nearly every healer prescribed, was a simple and a beautiful blend of 3 dried fruits, ground together into a fine brown powder, each of the 3 a different fruit of a different tree, each chosen to balance and complete the others, so that the 3 together made a remedy of perfect gentle balance, suited to almost everyone and almost every gentle trouble. One of the 3 was that same king of medicines that we met, far back and high up, on the roof of the world, the small ridged brown fruit that holds all the tastes, for this fruit grew in the warm valleys of this land, and was carried up to the cold plateau, and here in its home country it was used as freely and as lovingly as anywhere on earth. The other 2 were its near cousins, fruits of related trees, each with its own gentle balancing virtue. And the 3 ground together made a powder that was given, stirred into warm water at the end of the day, as the great gentle cleanser and balancer of the whole body, a remedy for the sluggish gut, for the tired eye, for the heavy head, for the body grown slowly clogged and dull, a remedy mild enough to take every day across a whole long life, and held, indeed, to lengthen that life, and to keep the old years bright and the body easy, and a great store of this beloved 3 fruit powder goes into our loads, the second of the remedies of the land of 5 rivers. The third remedy of the land of 5 rivers is the warm pepper trinity. In the spice markets of this land, which are among the richest and most fragrant in the whole world, where the air itself is so thick with the mingled scent of 100 spices that a stranger grows almost dizzy with it, the most important of all the medicinal spices, the foundation of a great many of the warming remedies of this land, was a trinity of 3 warm pungent things, used so often together that the healers spoke of them as one: the dried fruit of the long pepper, slender and warm and sweet and deeply heating; the dried fruit of the round black pepper, that famous spice for which the merchants of the whole world came to the warm coasts of this land, sharp and pungent and clean; and the dried rhizome of the ginger, warm and aromatic and kindling, and these three ground together made the great warming remedy of the land, given for the cold body, for the weak digestion, for the cough and the cold and the clogged chest, for the heavy, dull body that could not warm itself, for the inner fire that had sunk too low. The black pepper alone, that humble spice that sits now on every table in the world, was in those days a treasure worth crossing oceans for, the great wealth of the warm southern coasts of this land. And the ships and the caravans of the whole world came for it, and carried it away, west along this very road and over the southern seas, until the word for it, in many a distant tongue, became almost the word for spice itself, and the warm coasts where it grew became, for the merchants of distant lands, a kind of fabled country of wealth. A great store of the warm pepper trinity, the long pepper and the black pepper and the dried ginger, goes into our loads, both as medicine and as treasure, the third of the remedies of the land of 5 rivers. Let me name, as the warm wet evening settles over the green river country, and the frogs begin their chorus in the flooded fields, and the heavy sweet scent of the night flowers drifts across the gardens, a few more of the remedies and the customs of this oldest of medicines before we move on. There is the clarified golden butter that the healers of this land prized above almost any other thing as a carrier of medicine. The butter slowly simmered until its water is gone, and only the clear golden fat remains, which keeps without spoiling for a long time, and which the healers used as the base for a great many of their remedies, simmering the herbs gently into the warm golden butter, so that their virtue passed into it, and giving the medicated butter by the spoonful for the troubles of the inner body. For it was held that the golden butter carried the virtue of the herbs deep into the tissues, gently and warmly, and without harshness, and that it nourished and soothed and strengthened even as it healed. There is the fragrant pale wood of the sandal tree, ground into a cooling paste, and spread upon the hot brow and the fevered skin, cooling and calming and sweetly scented, used to cool the body and to quiet the mind, and to lift the troubled heart. There is the small green pod of the cardamom, sweet and fragrant and warming, chewed to sweeten the breath and to settle the stomach, and added to 100 remedies and 100 sweet dishes. There is the careful art of the breath and the posture and the quieting of the mind, which the healers of this land held to be as much a part of medicine as any herb, teaching that a calm and a well-ordered mind is the foundation of a healthy body, and that the troubled and the racing and the over-busy mind is itself a kind of illness, to be healed by the slow, deep, quiet breath and the calm ordering of the day. And there are the great gardens of healing plants that the temples and the wise households of this land tended, where every plant of the long pharmacy was grown and studied and gathered, so that the healer might always have, fresh and at hand, the living remedies of the art. And so, with the saddlebags full of the golden root and the 3 fruit powder and the warm pepper trinity, and the clarified butter and the fragrant sandalwood and the sweet cardamom, and our minds full of the warm green rivers and the heavy sweet air, and the ancient patient wisdom of the oldest of all the healing sciences, we let the patient animals rest one last warm night in the green river country, and then in the soft warm dawn we load them once more and turn our faces back to the north and the west, back up over the high cold passes and down again onto the great westward road, for there is one more great land ahead of us, before the road comes down at last to the sea. The greatest city of learning in the whole world of its day, the river, city of the Western Caliphs, where the wisdom of every land we have passed through, the eastern roots and the mountain fruits and the oasis seeds and the garden waters and the river, country spices, was gathered together into one place, studied, ordered, perfected, and where the art of the apothecary itself, the very art of the careful weighing and compounding and dispensing of medicine, was first raised into a true and a licensed profession. So let us go on, west and a little north, down the long road toward the great river city, the city of peace. The road to the great river city runs, for many days, across the dry brown highlands of the west, and then comes down, gradually, into a broad, flat green country watered by two great rivers that run side by side toward the southern sea, a country of date palms and irrigated fields and old cities, the oldest cities in the world, where people had been building and writing and trading and healing for longer than almost anywhere on earth. And at the heart of this ancient watered country, on the banks of one of the two great rivers, stood, in the time of our journey, the greatest and the richest and the most learned city in the whole of the known world, a vast round city of 1,000,000 souls, a city of libraries and hospitals and markets and gardens, the seat of the caliphs who ruled in those days over a great part of the world, and the meeting place of all its learning. The people of this city called it, in their own tongue, by a name that means the city of peace, and into it, along the very road we have traveled, flowed the goods and the books and the wisdom of every land we have passed through, the silk and the roots of the east, the spices of the south, the rosewater of the gardens, the resins of the steppe, and, most precious of all, the books, the great old books of medicine of every people, which the caliphs of this city gathered and paid great sums for, and had translated, by a great patient army of scholars, into the tongue of their own people, so that the wisdom of the whole world might be gathered together, in one language, in one place, in one great house of learning, that became famous across the earth. It was in this city, more than anywhere else along the whole road, that the medicine of the world was brought together and made whole, for the scholars of this city had before them, all at once, in their own tongue, the humour, medicine of the far west, the spice, medicine of the south, the careful root, medicine of the east, and the gentle garden, medicine of the kingdom of the rose, and they studied them all, and compared them, and tested them, and wrote great new books of their own that drew the best of all of them together into a single ordered science. Books so complete and so well made that they would be carried west in time, along the rest of this road and over the sea, and translated again into the tongues of the far western lands, and taught in the schools of distant kingdoms for many hundreds of years, so that the medicine of the whole world, gathered and ordered in this one great city, flowed out again to teach the world. And it was here too, in this city above all, that the art of the apothecary, the very art we honor, the careful art of weighing and grinding and compounding and storing and dispensing the medicines, was first raised into a true and a separate and a licensed profession, set apart from the physician who diagnosed and prescribed, with its own shops, its own rules, its own inspectors who walked the markets to test the weights and the wares, its own long training, so that the careful keeper of the drug shop became, here, for the first time in the world, a recognized and an honored and a regulated master of his craft. The first remedy of the city of peace is not a plant at all, but a method, and it is the gentle method of the still. We met, far back, in the kingdom of the rose, the beginnings of the art of distillation, the gentle drawing of a plant's virtue up in steam and down again in cooling. And we filled our saddlebags there with rosewater and the fragrant waters of the still. But it was here, in the city of peace, among the scholars and the seekers of this great city, that the art of the still was carried to its full height and set down, in careful writing, as a true science, for the curious and patient scholars of this city, in their long search to understand the hidden nature of all substances, built better stills and finer stills, and understood the method more deeply, and gave to the world the very name, in their own tongue, of the curved vessel at the heart of the still, the name that would travel west along this road and become, in the Western tongues, the very word for the apparatus of distillation. With their fine stills, the scholars of this city drew the fragrant waters of 100 plants, and the precious oils that float atop those waters, and they sought, in their patient way, to draw out the very spirit and essence of things, and though much of their searching was bound up with the old dream of transforming the baser metals into gold, a dream that never came true, the careful methods they perfected in that long searching, the distilling and the dissolving and the crystallizing and the filtering and the careful weighing, became the very foundation of the chemist's art, and flowed along this road into the medicine and the science of the whole world that came after. And so the first thing we take on in the city of peace is not a thing we can pack in a saddlebag at all, but a method, the gentle perfected method of the still, which we carry forward in the skill of our hands and the knowledge of our minds, the first of the gifts of the city of peace. The second remedy of the city of peace is the great compound syrup and the gentle electuary. The apothecaries of this city, having before them the medicines of the whole world, and the perfected methods of the still, and the careful weights of their licensed craft, became the great masters of the compound remedy, the careful blending of many ingredients into a single medicine more complete than any of its parts, and above all they perfected the two great gentle forms of the compound remedy, the sweet syrup and the soft electuary. The syrup we have met, the careful blending of a plant's virtue with sweetness into a pleasant lasting liquid, and the apothecaries of this city made syrups of an art and a refinement never seen before. Syrups of the rose and the violet and the poppy, head for sleep, syrups of the sour fruits for the hot stomach, syrups of the soothing roots for the raw chest, each one carefully made and carefully kept and carefully dispensed by the spoonful from the gleaming shelves of the drug shop. And beside the syrups they made the electuaries, the soft, sweet pastes in which many ground ingredients were bound together with honey or with thickened syrup into a soft paste that could be kept for a long time and given by the small spoonful, a gentle and a pleasant and a lasting form for the compound remedy, easy to take, easy to keep, easy to carry. And into the electuaries the apothecaries of this city blended the gathered virtues of many plants, the warming and the cooling, the soothing and the strengthening, drawn from every land along the road, so that a single small jar of a fine electuary might hold within it the harvest of half the world. A good store of the fine syrups, sealed in their stout jars, and of the soft electuaries in their sealed pots, goes into our loads, the second of the gifts of the city of peace. The third remedy of the city of peace is the careful licensed craft itself. There is one more thing we take on in this great city, and like the method of the still, it is not a thing we can pack in a load. But it is perhaps the most valuable thing of the whole journey. And it is the careful ordered, licensed craft of the apothecary itself, the very thing that I have spent my own long life in the keeping of. For it was here, in this city and the cities that learned from it, that the keeping of medicines was first made into a true and a careful and a regulated profession, with its rules and its standards and its inspectors and its long training, so that the person who came to the drug shop with a trouble of the body could trust that the weights were true, that the wares were fresh, that the costly ingredient had not been quietly replaced with a cheap one, that the dangerous remedy was kept locked away and parted with only carefully, and that the master behind the counter had truly learned his craft. The inspectors of this city walked the markets and tested the scales and tasted the wares and read the labels, and a drug seller found cheating his customers, selling a stale herb for a fresh one, or a common root for a precious one, was punished and shamed. And so the people came to trust the drug shop, and the apothecary became an honored man, and the careful keeping of medicine became a craft to be proud of and to hand down with care from master to apprentice across the long years. And that careful, honest, ordered craft, more than any single root or fruit or fragrant water, is the great gift of the city of peace, the gift that I carry forward to you now, across all the long centuries, in the very quiet of this shop, in the very care with which I weigh and grind and compound the remedies of the road, and it is the third and perhaps the finest of all the gifts of the city of peace. Let me name, as the lamps are lit in the 1,000 windows of the great round city, and the call of the evening drifts across the river, and the scholars bend, late, over their books in the great house of learning, a few more of the remedies and the customs of this place before we move on toward the sea. There is the great institution of the healing house, the hospital, which this city and its sister cities built and supported on a scale never seen before, great buildings with separate halls for the different illnesses, with running water and clean beds, and trained physicians and stores of every remedy, with kitchens that cooked the careful diets the physicians prescribed, with musicians to soothe the troubled in mind, and even, in the greatest of them, with a small payment given to the poor patient on their discharge, that they need not return at once to want. For the people of this city held the care of the sick to be among the highest of all duties, a sacred charge laid upon the rich and the powerful, and they built, for the sick, some of the finest and kindest institutions the world had yet seen. There is the great trade in the costly drugs of the whole road that flowed through this city's markets. The eastern roots and the southern spices, and the precious resins, and the fragrant waters all changing hands here, weighed on the true scales of the licensed apothecaries, recorded in their careful ledgers, dispensed from their gleaming shelves, and there are the great books themselves, once more, the long careful encyclopedias of this city's physicians. in which the whole gathered medicine of the world was set down, ordered, and improved. Books that would travel west along the rest of this road and teach the far western world its medicine for many hundreds of years to come. And so, with the saddlebags full of the fine syrups and the soft electuaries, and our hands full of the perfected method of the still, and our hearts full of the careful, honest, ordered craft of the licensed apothecary, and our minds full of the great round city, and its libraries and its hospitals, and its 1,000 drug shops, we rest one last night in the city of peace, by the bank of the great slow river, and then, in the cool dawn, we load the patient animals once more for the last long stretch of the road, the stretch that runs down now from the great river city toward the warm inland sea, at the very western edge of the known world, where the goods of the whole road are loaded onto ships, and where, in the markets of the coast, all the medicines we have gathered along the whole length of the journey are at last brought together into the most famous remedy of the entire old world. So let us go on, west and a little north, down the last of the road toward the markets of the inland sea. The last long stretch of the road runs west and north, up out of the watered land of the two rivers, across a high dry plain, and then down, gradually, toward the warm coast of the great inland sea. And as the caravan draws near to the coast, the land changes once again, growing softer and greener and gentler, terraced with vineyards and olive, groves and orchards, dotted with old white towns climbing their dry hillsides, scented with the warm, dry, fragrant scrub of the coastal hills, the wild thyme and the wild sage, and the wild rosemary baking in the sun, so that the very air of this land is a kind of medicine, dry and warm and aromatic and clean. And at last the road comes down through the coastal hills into one of the great old market cities of the inland sea, an ancient city of stone, of covered markets and shaded courtyards and old streets, a city that had stood already for thousands of years when our journey was made. That had been the meeting place of the desert caravans and the sea, traders for longer than anyone could remember, where the goods of the long road, come at last to the end of the land, were unpacked and sorted and weighed and sold and loaded onto the ships that would carry them on across the warm sea to the far western lands. This was the great hinge of the whole road, this coast, the place where the long land journey met the long sea journey. And the markets of these coastal cities were among the richest and the most famous in the whole world, for here, at the end of the land, the costly goods of the whole East, carried so far at such cost and such risk, fetched their highest prices, and the merchants who had brought them so far grew rich, and the merchants of the western sea who bought them and carried them on grew richer still. And the drug trade of these coastal markets was the richest of all, for the medicines of the East, the roots and the spices and the resins and the fragrant waters, were the lightest and the most valuable of all the goods of the road, the goods that best repaid the long cost of carrying them. And so the apothecaries and the spice merchants of the coastal cities were among the wealthiest of all the merchants of the sea, and their warehouses were heavy with the gathered pharmacy of half the world. The first remedy of the coast is the fragrant gum of the dry hills. In the dry, warm hills of this coastal land, and on certain warm, dry islands of the inland sea, there grow small tough trees and shrubs that weep, from cuts made carefully in their bark, a fragrant gum or resin. And these fragrant gums were among the most ancient and most valued of all the medicines, and the perfumes of the inland sea, gathered for thousands of years, traded the whole length of the road, burned as sweet incense in the temples and the great houses, chewed to sweeten the breath and to strengthen the gum and the tooth, dissolved into the salves and the plasters of the physicians, and added to a great many of the compound remedies for their fragrance and their gentle healing virtue. There is the pale fragrant gum that weeps from a small tree of a particular warm island, prized above all the rest, chewed for the breath and the digestion and dissolved into the finest salves. There is the sweet brown gum of a coastal shrub, used in the plasters and the incense. There is the white fragrant gum, almost like frozen honey, of a coastal tree, used for the cough and the chest. And there is the precious storax, the sweet dark fragrant balsam of a coastal tree, one of the most beloved of all the perfumed resins, burned for its sweet smoke and dissolved into the costliest of the compound remedies. A good store of all these fragrant gums of the dry coastal hills, sealed against the warmth that would soften them, goes into our loads, the first of the remedies of the coast. The second remedy of the coast is the gentle gum that binds. The apothecaries all along the road had need of substances that would bind and thicken and smooth their remedies, that would hold the powders together in a pill, that would thicken a syrup, that would soothe a raw surface with a gentle slippery film. And the coastal lands and the dry lands behind them furnished some of the finest of these binding and soothing gums, the pale gum that weeps from a thorny desert tree, dissolving in water into a clear, smooth, slippery liquid, used to bind the pills and thicken the syrups and soothe the raw throat and the inflamed gut, and the white gum of another thorny shrub, swelling in water into a soft, smooth paste, used to bind and to soothe in just the same way. And these gentle binding gums, though humble, were among the most necessary of all the apothecary's materials, the quiet servants of the whole craft, without which the fine pills and the smooth syrups and the soothing draughts could not be made at all. And a good store of them goes into our loads, the second of the remedies of the coast. The third remedy of the coast is the wild aromatic herb of the warm hills. The dry, warm hills of this coastal land grow, wild and abundant, the great aromatic herbs that the cooks and the physicians of the inland sea had used since the most ancient times, the wild thyme and the wild sage and the wild rosemary and the wild marjoram and the wild oregano and the wild mint, growing thick and fragrant on the sun-baked hillsides, gathered in great quantities in the dry months, and dried in the warm air, and traded all along the coast and inland, both as the flavorings of the kitchen and as the gentle everyday medicines of the household. The wild thyme for the cough and the chest and the cleansing of a wound, the wild sage for the sore throat and the troubled gut and the strengthening of the memory, the wild rosemary for the heavy head and the failing memory and the chilled body, the wild mint for the upset stomach and the freshening of the breath, the wild marjoram and oregano for the cold and the cough, and the troubled digestion. These were the humblest and the most abundant of all the medicines of the coast, the gentle common herbs that grew wild and free on every hillside, and that every household gathered and dried and used, and yet they were, for all their humility, among the most useful and the most beloved of all remedies, the quiet, faithful friends of the kitchen and the sick room alike, and a good store of these dried wild aromatic herbs, fragrant and light, goes into our loads, the third of the remedies of the coast. Let me name, as the sun sinks toward the warm, shining water of the inland sea and the fishing, boats come in to the old stone harbour, and the lamps are lit in the covered markets. A few more of the remedies and the customs of this last land of the road before we come, at the very end, to the great compound that gathers them all. There is the great trade in the medicines of the Western Sea itself, that flowed east through these coastal markets to meet the medicines of the east flowing west, the precious dried beetle that yielded a costly red dye and a costly red remedy, the white chalky earths and the colored clays that the physicians used to dry and to bind and to settle the gut, the dried sea creatures and the corals and the strange minerals of the western shores. There is the great learning of the Western physicians, who had inherited, through this coast, the gathered medicine of the whole road, the eastern roots and the southern spices, and the garden's waters and the river, city's syrups, all carried west along the very road we have travelled, so that the physician of the far western city, prescribing for a patient, drew, without perhaps even knowing it, on the gathered wisdom of half the world and the whole long history of the road. And there is the great old tradition, kept most carefully here on this coast and in the great city of the Eastern Empire, just up the shore, of the single greatest compound remedy of the entire old world, the remedy that gathered into one bowl the precious ingredients of every land along the road. And it is to that great gathering remedy, the destination toward which our whole long journey has been quietly tending, that we now, at the very end of the road, at last come. For there is a kind of fitness, a kind of quiet rightness in the fact that the road should end here, at the warm inland sea, with all the saddlebags full, all the medicines of all the lands, gathered together at last in the one place. For it was here, on this coast, and in the great city of the Eastern Empire, just along it, that the apothecaries of the old world made the one remedy that, more than any other, was the meeting place of the whole road, the great compound electuary into which the precious ingredients of every land we have passed through were gathered, ground, blended, and bound into a single dark sweet paste, the most famous, the most copied, the most revered of all the remedies of the entire old world. We will not tell tonight the long old story of where that great remedy first came from, for that is a tale for another evening, and a long one. Tonight we will simply watch, in the quiet of the coastal apothecary's shop, as the master opens, one by one, all the loads of our long caravan, and gathers from each of them the precious ingredient that each land contributed, and lays them all out together, at last, upon the long stone bench, the harvest of the whole road, gathered in one place, ready to be made into one remedy. And as he lays them out, we may remember, each in its turn, the long road that brought it here, and the land it came from, and the hands that gathered it, and the slow, patient journey it made, swaying in a load on the back of a patient animal, market to market, all the long length of the road, to come, at last, to rest here, on this stone bench, by the warm inland sea, at the western end of the oldest road in the world. So let us go into the coastal apothecary's shop, in the warm lamplit evening, and watch the master open the loads, and gather the ingredients of the whole road, and begin to make the great remedy that gathers them all. The coastal apothecary's shop is much like the shops of the whole road, a narrow doorway, a long stone counter, deep shelves climbing to the high beam ceiling, the alabaster jars and the dark glass flasks and the linen bags and the wax sealed pots, the soft mingled scent of 100 dried plants, a single lamp burning on the counter in the warm evening. But tonight this shop is fuller than usual, for the loads of our whole long caravan have been carried in and set down along the wall, and the master of the shop, a quiet, careful old man with patient hands, is about to do the thing that the apothecaries of this coast did once a year with great ceremony: the gathering of the ingredients of the whole road into the one great remedy. And so he begins, slowly, in no hurry at all, to open the loads one by one, and to take from each the precious thing it carried, and to lay them all out in their order along the long, clean stone bench. And as he does so, the whole of our journey comes back, ingredient by ingredient, in the warm lamplight of the coastal shop. From the first load, the load that has come the whole length of the road, all the way from the eastern gate, he takes the small, dark, warming things of the east, the fragrant, rolled bark of the eastern cinnamon tree, sweet and warm, and a small, careful measure of the precious eastern roots, and he lays them on the bench. And as he does so, we remember the grey dawn at the eastern gate, the long line of camels forming in the cold, the great medicine market with its 1,000 scents, the man root pulled whole from the cold, dark forest soil, the great golden clearing root, the whole slow, patient art of the East that holds the body to be a garden, to be tended, season by season, back into its health. That is the Eastern contribution to the great remedy, the warm, sweet bark and the precious roots, laid first upon the bench, and the master nods over them and turns to the next load. From the high mountain load, he takes the precious red threads of the saffron flower, glowing and costly, and lays them on the bench, and we remember the long, cold climb to the roof of the world, the thin, bright air, the endless golden plateau under the deep blue sky, the king of medicines that holds all the tastes, the deep, penetrating musk, the silk, wrapped precious pills made with long prayer and long care, the gentle mountain wisdom that the healer must first be calm and kind. The red threads of saffron go onto the bench beside the eastern bark, glowing in the lamplight like a little heap of fire, and the master turns to the next load. From the Oasis load, he takes a careful measure of the warm, fragrant kitchen, seeds and a small portion of the pungent resin of the steppe, and lays them on the bench, and we remember the green smudge on the desert horizon, the cool shaded lanes of the Oasis city, the loud crowded bazaar where the medicines of the whole world met on the one set of stalls, the sweet dried fruit of the long lived valleys, the great fragrant melons, the small kind comforts of the traveling life. The seeds and the resin go onto the bench, and the master turns to the next load. From the load of the kingdom of the rose, he takes a small precious flask of the fragrant rosewater and a careful measure of the gentle sweet syrups, and lays them on the bench. And we remember the cool green walled gardens with their playing fountains and their straight channels of clear running water, the fields of small pink roses gathered in the grey dawn, the gentle copper stills drawing the very soul of the rose up in steam and down again in cooling, the sweet medicinal syrups that even a child would gladly take. The great kind healing houses with their running water and their soothing music, the patient-learned physicians and their long, careful books. The fragrant water and the sweet syrups go onto the bench, filling the warm air of the shop with the scent of roses, and the master turns to the next load. From the load of the land of 5 rivers, he takes a careful measure of the deep golden root and a small portion of the warm pepper trinity, the long pepper and the black pepper and the dried ginger, and lays them on the bench. And we remember the hard high passes over the great wall of mountains, the warm, wet green of the river country, the heavy sweet air full of the scent of night, flowers, the golden root that stains everything with its glowing color, the beloved 3 fruit powder, the rich spice, markets where the air itself is thick with fragrance, the clarified golden butter that carries the medicine deep into the body, the ancient patient science, whose very name means the knowledge of long life. The golden powder and the warm pepper go onto the bench, deep gold and dark, and the master turns to the next load. From the load of the city of peace, he takes a careful measure of the finest compound electuary and a small precious flask of the distilled essence, and lays them on the bench. And we remember the great round city of 1,000,000 souls on the bank of the slow river, the great house of learning, where the wisdom of the whole world was gathered and translated into one tongue, the perfected stills and the careful chemists, the gleaming drug shops of the licensed apothecaries, with their true scales and their honest wares, the great kind hospitals with their separate halls and their soothing music and their gift to the poor on their discharge. The fine electuary and the distilled essence go onto the bench, and the master turns to the last of the loads. From the coastal load itself, the load of this very land, he takes a careful measure of the fragrant gums of the dry, warm hills, the pale chewing gum, and the sweet storax and the white fragrant gum, and a portion of the gentle binding gums that hold the whole remedy together, and a handful of the wild aromatic herbs of the sun, baked hillsides, the wild thyme and the wild sage, and lays them all on the bench. And we remember the warm dry coast with its terraced vineyards and its olive groves and its old white towns, the fragrant scrub baking in the sun, the rich markets where the long land journey met the long sea journey, the wealthy spice merchants with their warehouses heavy with the pharmacy of half the world, the fragrant gums and the binding gums and the wild herbs go on to the bench. And now at last all the loads are open, and all the ingredients of the whole road are laid out together in their order along the long clean stone bench, the harvest of the entire journey, gathered in one place, glowing and fragrant in the warm lamplight. And the master of the coastal shop stands back and looks along the bench at the whole road gathered there before him, and is quiet for a long moment. And then, slowly, in no hurry at all, he begins to make the great remedy. He takes each ingredient in its turn and grinds it, careful and slow, in the great heavy bronze mortar, the warm bark and the precious roots, the glowing saffron and the fragrant seeds, the golden root and the warm pepper, the fragrant gums and the wild herbs, each one ground in its turn to a fine soft powder. Each powder weighed on the true scale and laid in a small heap upon a clean linen cloth, until the whole bench is lined with the small fragrant heaps of the ground ingredients of the whole road. And then he takes a wide, shallow, clean stone bowl and lines it with clean linen, and into the bowl In their careful order, he adds the small heaps, one by one, the warm, sweet things first, then the fragrant resins, then the precious spices, then the gentle roots, then the wild herbs, stirring gently with a long bronze stirrer as he goes, and at the last he adds the fragrant rosewater, and the sweet thick syrup, and a measure of pure clear honey to bind the whole, and he stirs, slowly, slowly, with a long patient rhythm, turning the whole fragrant mass over and over upon itself, until all the ingredients of the whole road are blended into one single dark, sweet, fragrant paste, the color of dark honey, the scent of it holding within it, all at once, the cinnamon of the east, and the saffron of the mountains, and the seeds of the oasis, and the rose of the gardens, and the gold of the river country, and the essence of the city of peace, and the gums of the coast, the whole road, the whole journey, the whole gathered pharmacy of half the world, blended into one quiet, dark, sweet paste in one stone bowl, by the patient hands of one old man, in the warm lamplight of one small shop, by the shore of the warm inland sea, at the western end of the oldest road in the world. And when the long stirring is done, the master scrapes the dark, sweet paste, very carefully, into a small alabaster jar, and seals it with a careful disc of wax, and carries it to the highest shelf, and sets it there in the quiet to age, for this remedy, like the finest of all the compound remedies, is not used at once, but is left to rest on the high shelf for years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 15, sometimes 20, so that the many ingredients may slowly settle into one another, may slowly marry, may slowly become, with the patience of the years, something greater and gentler, and more complete than the simple sum of all the things that went into it, the whole road, aging slowly into one quiet harmony, on the high shelf of the coastal shop, in the warm dark by the sound of the sea. And that, in the end, is what the great remedy is, and what the whole long road was, the slow gathering of the scattered wisdom of many lands, the warm patient root, medicine of the east, the calm, kind, contemplative medicine of the mountains, the crossroads trade of the Oasis, the gentle, beautiful garden, medicine of the kingdom of the rose, the ancient golden science of the land of 5 rivers, the great gathered ordered learning of the city of peace, the fragrant herbs and gums of the warm coast, all of it carried, slowly, patiently, market to market, hand to hand, animal to animal, across deserts and over mountains and through gardens, and along the warm shore of the inland sea, until it could all be gathered together, at last in one quiet bowl, and blended, with patience and with care and with honest skill, into one quiet remedy, aging slowly in one quiet jar, holding within it the gathered kindness of half the world. There is something deeply restful in that, I have always thought, in the slow patient gathering of scattered good things into one quiet whole, and it seems a fitting place for our long journey to come, at last, to its rest. There is time yet, before we let the long night settle fully toward its rest, to walk back, in the quiet way that memory allows, along certain of the legs of the road, and to gather a few of the gentler remedies that we passed by too quickly the first time, and to sit a while longer in certain of the markets, and to watch certain of the patients who came, in their trouble, to the apothecaries of the road, for the road is long, and there is no hurry at all, and the remembering of it is itself a quiet and a settling thing. Let us go back, first, in the mind, to the eastern market on that first grey morning, and stand a little longer among the stalls, for there were gentle remedies there that we did not pause over. There was the small dried fruit of a thorny tree, sweet and sour and red, that the Eastern physicians used to quiet a racing and a restless heart, and to bring sleep to the person who lay awake at night with their thoughts running too fast. The small red fruit simmered into a sweet sour tea, and given in the evening to settle the mind, and to draw down the scattered energy of the day, so that sleep might come, a remedy of great gentleness, much loved by the worried, and the overworked and the old, and one that I have always held in particular affection. For the bringing of quiet sleep to a troubled person is among the kindest things that any remedy can do. There was the white fungus that grows on the old trees of the damp eastern forests, that the Eastern physicians simmered for many hours into a clear, gentle soup, soothing to a dry chest and a dry throat and a dry skin, given to the person worn dry and thin by long illness or long age, a remedy of moistening and of gentle nourishing, slow and mild and kind. There was the dried chrysanthemum flower, the small pale flower steeped into a light fragrant tea, cooling and clearing, given for the hot tired eye, and the heavy aching head, and the small fevers of the warm season, a tea so pleasant and so gentle that the Eastern people drank it as much for the pleasure of it as for any medicine. And there was the great mushroom of long life, the hard shining woody fungus that the Eastern people prized above almost any other thing as a remedy for the lengthening of life, and the calming of the spirit, and the strengthening of the worn body, so precious and so revered that it appeared in the old Eastern paintings in the hands of the spirits of long life themselves, and that was given in a slow bitter simmered tea to the old and the worn and the troubled, to settle the spirit and to strengthen the deep root of the body, and to bring, it was hoped, the long quiet years. Let us add these gentle Eastern remedies in the mind to the loads we have already gathered, the sweet sour sleep fruit, and the moistening white fungus, and the cooling flower, tea and the great mushroom of long life, and let us watch, for a moment, one of the patients who came to the Eastern apothecary on that first grey morning. She is an old woman, small and bent, in the plain dark clothes of a country household, and she has come a long way into the city, and she stands a little uncertain at the counter, and she tells the apothecary in a low voice that she cannot sleep, that for many months now she has lain awake in the dark, long after the household is quiet, her heart racing, her thoughts running over and over the same worn paths, and that she is tired, so tired, all the day, and cannot rest at all in the night. And the apothecary, who has heard this trouble 1,000 times, and who is in no hurry at all, listens to the whole of it, and nods, and then reaches down, without a word, the small dried red sleep fruit, and weighs out a careful measure, and wraps it, and tells her, gently, how to simmer it into a sweet sour tea in the evening, a little before she means to lie down, and to drink it slowly, warm by the light of a small lamp, and to let the day fall away from her as she drinks it, and to think, as she drinks, not of the worn paths of her worry, but only of the warmth of the cup in her hands, and the quiet of the house around her. And she nods, and pays her few small coins, and carries the little packet of red fruit away into the morning, and we may hope, as we watch her go, that the small red fruit did, that night, what it was meant to do, and drew the racing heart down into quiet, and let the long-awaited sleep come at last to the tired old woman in the dark country house. Now let us go back, in the mind, to the roof of the world, and sit a little longer in the thin bright air, for there were gentle things there too, that we passed by. There was the rhododendron of the high slopes, the small, tough mountain shrub, whose flowers and leaves the mountain healers gathered and dried and steeped into a warming tea for the chilled body and the troubled chest and the heavy head of the height. There was the gentian of the high meadows, the small deep blue flower, whose bitter root the healers used to wake a sluggish stomach and to kindle a weak digestion and to clear a heavy clouded head. There was the sea buckthorn of the high valleys, the small bright orange berry, sharp and sour and full of goodness, that the mountain people gathered in great quantities and made into a sharp sour juice, and a sharp sour preserve given to the worn and the weak and the wasted to build the body back, and held to be among the most strengthening and most nourishing of all the gifts of the high land. And there was the slow, gentle art of the mountain healer at the bedside, which was itself a kind of medicine, for the mountain healer, before ever reaching for a remedy, would sit a long while by the sick person and take the pulse, not quickly but slowly, with great attention, feeling at the wrist for the many subtle qualities that the mountain art could read in the beating of the blood, the strength and the depth and the rhythm and the quality of it, and would look long at the tongue and at the eyes and at the color of the skin, and would ask, gently, many quiet questions about the sleep and the appetite and the dreams and the troubles of the mind. For the mountain art held, above all, that the healer must understand the whole person, body and mind and spirit together, before ever presuming to treat any single part, and that the slow attentive presence of the calm healer at the bedside was itself the beginning of the cure. Let us watch, for a moment, one of the patients of the mountain healer. He is a young herdsman, brought down from the high pastures on the back of a yak by his companions. For he has taken a deep chill in a sudden storm on the high slopes, and now he lies fevered and shaking and short of breath in the low stone house of the village, and the healer has been sent for, and comes, in no hurry, with a small worn bag of remedies, and sits down quietly by the young man and takes the racing pulse, slowly, with great attention, and looks at the tongue, and lays a cool hand on the hot brow, and is quiet for a while, gathering in his mind the whole picture of the trouble. And then, slowly, he prepares his remedy, a warming tea of the high herbs and a small careful portion of one of the precious balancing pills, and he gives it to the young man by the spoonful, and he stays, through the long night, by the bedside, in the light of the small butter lamp, watching the breath and the pulse, giving the warm tea by the spoonful through the cold hours, speaking, now and then, a few quiet words until, toward the grey dawn, the fever breaks and the breath comes easier, and the young herdsman falls, at last, into a deep, quiet, healing sleep, and the healer sits on a little longer, watching him sleep, before he too, at last, lies down by the low fire to rest. That slow patient presence, through the long cold night, by the small butter lamp, watching the breath, giving the warm tea by the spoonful, is the very heart of the mountain art, and it is a thing worth carrying with us, in the mind, as the caravan goes on, the memory of the calm, kind healer, who knew that the greatest of all remedies is the patient presence of one who truly cares. And let us add, in the mind, these gentle mountain remedies to our loads, the warming rhododendron, and the bitter gentian, and the sharp sarsi, buckthorn, and let us load them gently with the rest and turn once more, in the quiet way that memory allows, back toward the Oasis cities, and then on toward the gardens of the kingdom of the rose, for there were gentle remedies there too, and gentle patience, that we passed by too quickly the first time, and the night is long, and there is no hurry at all, and the slow remembering of the road, market by market, and remedy by remedy, and patient by patient, is itself the very thing that, more than any single remedy, has the power to draw a tired and a wakeful mind down, at last, toward its rest. Let us go back, then, in the mind, to the Oasis cities, and sit a little longer in the loud, crowded, shaded bazaar, for there were gentle remedies there, and gentle people, that we did not pause over. There was the great trade in the cooling clay, and the cooling earth, the pale chalky earths, that the people of the dry lands ate, in small careful amounts, to settle a sour and a troubled stomach, and to bind a loose and a watery gut, an old remedy of the desert peoples who had learned, across long ages, which of the pale earths of their dry land were wholesome and settling, and which were not. There was the trade in the small sweet dates of the Oasis palms, the great staple food, and the great gentle medicine of the desert, sweet and nourishing and strengthening, eaten by the handful by the traveler, and the worker and the sick, soaked in milk for the weak and the wasted, ground into a sweet paste for the child, the very tree that bore them honored, across all the desert lands, as the tree of life, for it gave food and shade and fiber and wood and shelter, and asked, in return, only the precious water of the Oasis. And there was the gentle trade in the small comforts of the long caravan night, the warm spiced milk that the keepers of the caravanserai prepared for the tired travelers, the milk warmed slowly over the coals and stirred with a little honey and a pinch of the warming spices, the cardamom and the cinnamon and the ginger, and given in a warm cup to the weary traveler at the end of the long cold day, to warm the chilled body and to settle the tired stomach and to ease the worn limbs down towards sleep, a comfort more than a medicine, perhaps, and yet one of the kindest things in all the long life of the road, the warm spiced cup in the cold night, by the fire of the caravanserai, under the great desert stars. Let us watch for a moment one of the travelers of the Isis caravanserai on a cold, clear desert night. He is a merchant, not young, who has come a long way across the dry land, and he is tired to the bone, and his stomach is sour and uneasy from the strange food and the hard water of the road, and he sits a little apart by the fire, his shoulders bowed with the weariness of the journey, and the keeper of the caravanserai, who has seen 1,000 such tired men, brings him, without being asked, a warm cup of the spiced milk, and sets it in his hands, and the merchant wraps his cold hands around the warm cup and breathes in the sweet, warm, fragrant steam of it, the cinnamon and the cardamom and the ginger rising warm to his face, and drinks it slowly, in small sips by the light of the fire, and feels the warmth of it spread slowly through his chilled and weary body, and feels the soured stomach settle, and feels, with the warmth and the sweetness and the kindness of the unasked cup, a little of the heaviness of the long road lift, at last, from his bowed shoulders, and when the cup is empty he sits a while longer by the fire, looking up at the great wheel of the desert stars, And then he goes, at last, to his bed in the cool dark room, and lies down and falls, very quickly now, into the deep dreamless sleep of the truly tired, warmed and settled, and eased by the simple kindness of a warm spiced cup on a cold desert night. There is a great deal of medicine in such a cup, I have always thought, more perhaps than in many a costly remedy on a high shelf, for the warming and the sweetening and the settling of a tired body, and the simple kindness of a thing, given before it is even asked for, are among the truest healings in all the world. Now let us go on, in the mind, to the gardens of the kingdom of the rose, and walk a little longer in the cool green evening, among the playing fountains, for there were gentle remedies there too. There was the gentle remedy of sleep itself, which the physicians of this kingdom understood, and tended with great care, for they held that good sleep is the foundation of all health, and that the troubled and the broken and the absent sleep is both a cause and a sign of many illnesses. And so they made a particular study of the things that bring sleep. The gentle syrup of the poppy head given, carefully and sparingly, to the person in pain who could not rest, the warm bath before bed, the cool dark quiet room, the gentle music, the warm milk, the soothing fragrant waters of the still sprinkled on the pillow, the lettuce, seed, and the lettuce, water that they held to be gently calming. The whole careful gentle art of preparing the body and the mind for rest, an art that I have always honored. For the bringing of good sleep to the wakeful is among the highest of all the works of medicine. There was the gentle remedy of the fragrant garden itself, for the physicians of this kingdom built their healing houses among gardens precisely because they understood that the sight of green growing things, and the sound of running water, and the scent of flowers, and the cool shade of the trees, are themselves a medicine for the troubled mind and the weary body, and they would walk the recovering patients slowly in the cool of the evening through the green-walled gardens, by the running channels, beneath the fruit trees, that the calm and the beauty and the fragrance might do their slow, gentle, healing work upon the spirit. And there was the gentle remedy of the cooling drink in the heat of the summer, the clear, sweet, sour drink of fruit and fragrant water, cooled in the great houses, with snow brought down from the mountains, and kept through the summer in deep cold cellars, given to the fevered and the thirsty, and the over-hot to cool the body, and to gladden the heart, and to settle the burning of a summer fever. Let us watch, for a moment, one of the patients of the kingdom of the rose, in the cool of a summer evening, in the garden of one of the great healing houses. She is a young woman who has lain long ill of a wasting fever, and who is now, at last, slowly mending, and the physician has ordered that she be walked each evening in the cool of the garden, and so, in the soft golden light of the evening, leaning on the arm of a kind attendant, she walks, very slowly, along the straight cool channel of running water, between the beds of roses, beneath the dark cypress trees, and the fountains play softly in the gathering dusk, and the scent of the roses and the orange flowers rises warm and sweet on the cooling air, and a musician, somewhere in the garden, plays, very softly, a slow gentle tune upon a stringed instrument, and the young woman, who has been so long shut in the dark, close room of her illness, breathes in the cool, fragrant evening air, and feels the soft golden light on her pale face, and hears the soft music and the soft falling water, and feels with all of it, a slow gladness and a slow strength steal quietly back into her worn body and her worn spirit. And when the walk is done, and she is settled again in her cool, clean bed by the open window, she falls, with the scent of the garden still in the room and the soft sound of the fountain still in her ears, into a deep and a healing sleep, that gentle healing of the garden. The green and the water and the fragrance and the soft music and the cool evening air is one of the most beautiful things in all the long history of medicine. And it is a thing we may carry with us in the mind, the memory of the slow evening walk by the running water, beneath the cypress trees, in the garden of the kingdom of the rose. And let us add, in the mind, all these gentle remedies to our loads, the cooling earth and the sweet dates and the warm spiced milk of the Oasis, the gentle sleep craft and the fragrant garden and the cool summer drink of the kingdom of the rose, and let us load them gently with the rest and turn once more, in the quiet way that memory allows, back toward the land of 5 rivers, and then on toward the great city of peace. For there were gentle remedies there too, and gentle patience, and the night is long still, and there is no hurry at all, and the slow remembering of the road goes on, market by market, remedy by remedy, patient by patient, drawing the tired mind ever more gently down toward its rest. Let us go back, then, in the mind, to the warm green land of 5 rivers, and walk a little longer in the heavy fragrant evening. For there were gentle remedies there, and gentle people, that we did not pause over. There was the small fragrant leaf of the holy plant, that grew in the courtyard of nearly every household of that land, tended with love, and even with reverence. Its small fragrant leaves picked and steeped into a warm tea for the cough and the cold and the troubled chest and the heavy spirit, a plant held so wholesome and so blessed, that the people grew it by their doors as a guardian of the household's health. There was the gentle silvery resin and the cooling fragrant root that the healers of that land used to cool a body burning with fever, to quiet an inflamed and irritated place, to soothe a mind grown hot and restless and unable to settle. There was the small dark seed and the fragrant root that the healers used to draw the troubled mind down toward sleep, ground and warmed in milk and given to the wakeful. For the healers of this land too, like the healers of every land along the road, knew the great gentle art of bringing sleep to the troubled, and held it among the kindest of their works. And there was the deep slow art of the gentle oil, massage, which the healers of this land had raised to a particular height and a particular beauty. The warm medicated oil simmered with the herbs until their virtue had passed into it, poured warm and worked slowly and gently into the tired body with patient hands, easing the worn muscle and the aching joint and the dry skin and the troubled nerve, drawing the scattered and the anxious energy of the body down and settling it, soothing the whole person, body and mind together, into a deep and a quiet calm, an art of healing through the kind and patient touch that is among the gentlest in all the world. Let us watch for a moment one of the patients of the land of 5 rivers in the warm fragrant evening. He is an old man, a scholar, worn thin by a long life of study and worry, who has come to the healer complaining that he cannot rest, that his mind will not be still, that his body is dry and tired and aching, and that sleep has become a stranger to him. And the healer, who is in no hurry at all, listens to the whole of it and considers and then orders not first a remedy to be swallowed, but the gentle warm oil massage. And so, in the warm lamplit evening, the old scholar lies down upon a low wooden bench, and the warm medicated oil, fragrant with the soothing herbs, is poured slowly, warm, over his tired body, and worked in, slowly and gently and patiently, with kind and rhythmic hands, the worn shoulders, the aching back, the tired tight neck, the weary head, the soles of the tired feet, slowly, slowly, with the warm, fragrant oil, until the tight and anxious body of the old scholar begins, at last, to soften and to loosen and to let go, and the racing scattered mind, drawn down by the slow kind rhythm of the patient hands, begins, at last, to grow quiet and slow and heavy, and by the time the long gentle massage is done, the old scholar is half asleep already on the low bench, soft and warm and loose and quiet, and is helped gently to his bed, and falls almost at once into the deep and the dreamless and the long-awaited sleep. That gentle healing through the warm oil and the kind patient touch is one of the most beautiful of all the remedies of the road, and it is a thing we may carry with us in the mind, the memory of the slow, warm, fragrant massage that drew the tired old scholar at last down into his rest. Now let us go on in the mind to the great city of peace, and walk a little longer in its lamplit streets, for there were gentle remedies there too, and gentle institutions that we did not pause over. There was the great gentle syrup of the poppy, and the gentle syrup of the violet, and the gentle syrup of the water lily that the apothecaries of this city made with such art, given carefully to the person in pain who could not rest, to draw them gently down into a healing sleep. For the apothecaries of this city, who had gathered the sleep craft of the whole road, were the great masters of the gentle bringing of sleep, and made the finest sleeping syrups in the world, and gave them with great care and great judgment, sparingly and wisely, to those whose pain or whose grief or whose long sleeplessness had grown too great to bear. There was the gentle institution of the house of music in the great hospital, the hall where musicians played softly through the day and the night, slow, gentle, soothing music for the troubled and the wakeful and the sorrowing, for the physicians of this city held, as the physicians of the kingdom of the rose had held. That gentle music is a true medicine for the troubled mind, able to slow the racing thought, and to ease the anxious heart, and to draw the wakeful, at last, down towards sleep. And there was the gentle institution of the careful, kind nursing, the trained attendants, who tended the sick by day, and by night, who kept them clean and warm and fed, who gave the remedies at their proper hours, who sat with the frightened and the dying, who understood, as the wise of every land along the road understood, that the patient kind presence of one who cares is itself among the greatest of all the remedies. Let us watch, for a moment, one of the patients of the great hospital of the City of Peace, on a quiet night. He is a young soldier, wounded in some far campaign, brought at last to the great hospital to mend, and he lies in a clean bed in a quiet hall, and his wound is healing now slowly, but the nights are hard for him, for in the dark the pain returns, and worse than the pain, the fear and the grief of all that he has seen, so that he lies awake in the dark, his heart racing, unable to rest. And the kind attendant, making the slow rounds of the quiet hall by the light of a small lamp, sees that the young soldier is awake and troubled, and comes quietly and sits down by his bed, and speaks a few low kind words, and gives him a small careful measure of the gentle sleeping syrup, the sweet syrup of the poppy that the apothecaries of the city made with such art, and stays a while by the bed in the lamplight. And from somewhere down the long hall comes, very softly, the slow gentle music of the house of music, a slow tune upon a stringed instrument, drifting quiet through the dark, and the young soldier, with the gentle syrup easing the pain and the racing heart, and the kind presence sitting near, and the soft, slow music drifting through the dark hall, feels the fear and the grief grow slowly distant and dim, and feels his eyes grow heavy, and feels himself sinking, at last, slowly, gently, into the deep and the healing and the merciful sleep that he has so long been denied. That gentle healing of the great hospital, the careful syrup, and the kind presence, and the soft, slow music in the dark, is one of the finest flowers of the whole long road. And it is a thing we may carry with us, in the mind, the memory of the quiet hall, the small lamp, the soft music, and the troubled young soldier sinking, at last, into his merciful rest. And so, with all the gentle remedies of all the lands now gathered, in the mind, into our loads, the sleep fruit, and the long life mushroom of the East, the warming herbs and the patient bedside, presence of the mountains, the warm spiced milk and the sweet dates of the Oasis, the gentle sleep, craft and the fragrant garden of the kingdom of the rose, the warm oil massage and the holy leaf of the land of 5 rivers, the gentle sleeping syrups and the kind nursing and the soft music of the city of peace, and all the fragrant gums and wild herbs of the warm coast. We have now, truly, gathered the whole road, not only the costly roots and the precious spices and the famous compound remedies, but the gentle small kindnesses too, the warm cup and the patient presence and the soft music and the kind touch, which are, in the end, perhaps the truest medicines of all. And the loads are full now, fuller than full, and the great remedy is made and sealed, and set to age on the high shelf of the coastal shop, and the long road is at its end, and the warm inland sea lies before us, shining in the last of the evening light, and it is time, now, at last, slowly, in no hurry at all, to let the whole long journey come down, gently, toward its rest. There are a few more gentle remedies of the road, that I would not like us to leave behind us in the dark, small, humble things, easy to pass over, that the people of the road carried and used and loved, and that deserve their own quiet moment before the night gathers us in. There was, all along the road, from the eastern gate to the western sea, the great gentle remedy of honey, the slow gold gift of the patient bees, which every land along the road gathered and treasured and used, both as a sweetness and as a medicine, for honey was held by the healers of every land to be among the most healing of all substances, soothing to a raw and aching throat, gentle upon a troubled stomach, healing when spread upon a wound or a burn, where it seemed, by some quiet virtue of its own, to keep the hurt clean and to help the flesh knit, and binding, sweet and lasting, the many ingredients of the great compound remedies into one. The honey of each land had its own character, its own color and its own scent, drawn from the flowers of that land. The dark honey of the mountain heather, and the pale honey of the orange flower, and the green honey of the high alpine meadows, and the amber honey of the desert thorn. And the wise traveler, coming into a new land, would taste its honey first of all, to learn the flowers of the country from the gold the bees had made of them. A good store of the finest honey of each land went into the loads of every caravan, the slow gold gift of the patient bees, and it deserves its quiet moment here, the gentlest and the most universal of all the remedies of the road. There was, all along the road, the great gentle remedy of warm water itself, the simplest of all remedies, and perhaps the most often forgotten. For the healers of every land knew that a great many of the small troubles of the body, the chill and the cramp and the ache and the unease, are eased by nothing so simply and so surely as by warmth and by water, the warm bath, the warm compress laid on the aching place, the warm drink held in the cold hands, the warm steam breathed in through a troubled chest, the warm room and the warm bed for the chilled and the fevered, and the whole gentle art of warming, which costs nothing and which any household may give, was among the most faithful of all the medicines of the road. And the warm bath, above all, the slow easing of the tired body down into the warm still water, was held, from the eastern land to the western sea, to be among the gentlest of all the ways to draw a weary body and a busy mind toward rest at the close of the day. There was all along the road the great gentle remedy of the breath, the slow deep quiet breath, which the healers of the eastern land and the high plateau and the green river country alike had studied and taught and honored. For they knew, all of them, by their different ways and in their different words, that the breath is the bridge between the body and the mind, that a fast, shallow, troubled breath makes a fast, troubled mind, and a slow, deep, easy breath makes a slow, easy mind, and that a person who has learned to slow and to deepen and to ease their breath has learned one of the surest of all the ways to calm a racing heart, and to quiet a troubled spirit, and to draw an anxious, wakeful mind down, at last, toward rest. The healers of the road taught the breath to the troubled and the wakeful and the grieving, the slow drawing in, the gentle holding, the slow letting go, over and over, slow and deep and easy, until the body softened and the mind grew quiet, and sleep, at last, could come, and that gentlest of all remedies, the slow, deep, quiet breath, which asks for no jar and no scale, and no costly ingredient at all, but only the patient willingness to slow down and to let go, is perhaps, in the end, the truest medicine of the whole long road, and the one most fitting for us to carry with us now, into the close of the night. And there was, all along the road, in every land and every market and every shop, the great gentle remedy of the unhurried hour, the deep old wisdom, held by the apothecaries and the healers of every land alike, that the body and the mind are not mended in a hurry, that healing is slow, that rest is slow, that the wise healer and the wise patient both must learn, above all, the great patient art of slowing down, of letting the day fall away, of giving the body the unhurried quiet hours, in which alone it can do its own deep mending work. For the body heals itself, in the end, in sleep. And the great task of the healer is so often simply to clear away the troubles, and the pains, and the worries that stand between the tired body and its sleep, and to give it, at last, the deep unhurried quiet in which to rest, and to mend, and to be made whole. That, in the end, is the deepest wisdom of the whole long road, and it is the wisdom I would leave you with now. As the night closes over us, the deep old patient wisdom that there is no hurry, that there is nothing the night asks of you, that the body knows how to heal itself if only it is given the quiet and the warmth, and the deep unhurried rest in which to do it, and that the kindest and the truest thing that anyone, healer or patient, can do at the close of a long day is simply gently to let go and to slow down and to rest. And so, with these last gentle remedies gathered, the slow gold honey and the warm water and the slow deep breath and the unhurried quiet hour, the loads of our whole long journey are truly full at last, full of the costly roots and the precious spices and the famous compounds, yes, but full, too, of the gentle, small, humble things that are, in the end, the truest medicines of all, and there is nothing more now to gather and nowhere more to go, and the warm dark has come down all around us, kind and deep and quiet, and it is time at last to let the whole long road go and to come slowly, with nothing left to do, to the close of the night. Before the journey lets us go entirely, let us linger a little longer in the slow nightly rhythm of the caravan itself. For in all the gathering of remedies we have spoken less than we might of the simple slow life of the road, the long days of patient walking, and the long quiet nights of rest, and there is a great calm in that rhythm, a calm that is itself a kind of medicine, and the remembering of it is one of the gentlest ways to let a tired mind come down towards sleep. Think, then, of an ordinary evening of the road, anywhere along its length, between the markets, out in the empty land. The long day's march is ending. The sun is sinking, low and golden, toward the far western edge of the world, the very direction in which the road is always taking us. And the long shadows of the camels and the men stretch out long and blue across the dusty ground ahead. The lead camel, the old grey beast with the small bronze bell at its throat, has been walking since the cold dawn, and its slow patient stride has not changed all day, and the bell has rung, one soft note for every long stride, all the long day through. And now, as the light goes golden and the air begins to cool, the caravan master, riding near the front, lifts his hand and calls softly, the word that means the day is done, and the long line begins slowly to halt. The camels stop gratefully and stand and groan their long complaining groans, and the men move down the line. And one by one the great loads are unlashed and lifted down and set in their careful rows upon the ground, and the camels, freed of their burdens, fold their long legs beneath them and settle to the ground with their slow groaning sighs, and begin to chew and to rest. And the great patient weariness of the long day settles over the whole camp, like the cool blue dusk settling over the land. And then comes the slow gentle ritual of the evening camp, which is the same, more or less, every night, all the long length of the road, and which has, in its sameness and its slowness, a deep and a settling calm. The men gather the dry scrub and the dry dung for the fire, and strike a small flame, and feed it slowly until a good fire burns, low and red and warm, in the gathering dark. The water is fetched from the well or the stream or the carried skins, and the camels are watered, and the men wash the dust of the day from their faces and their hands. The evening meal is prepared slowly over the low fire, the flat bread baked on the hot stones, the simple stew of grain and dried meat, and a few of the precious travelling spices simmered in the blackened pot, the warm spiced milk or the bitter tea brewed in the small kettle, and the men gather close around the fire in the cool dark and eat slowly and talk, low and easy, of the day behind and the road ahead, of the markets they have seen and the markets still to come, of the prices and the dangers and the small events of the road. And now and then one of them, an old hand who has walked the road for 40 years, tells one of the long, slow stories of the road, of the strange things he has seen in the far markets, of the great storms and the lost caravans and the wonders of the distant cities. And the others listen, quiet, by the low red fire under the great wheel of the desert stars. And then, one by one, as the fire burns low and the night grows cold and the long weariness of the day grows too heavy to hold off any longer, the men wrap themselves in their thick blankets and lie down close to the warm bodies of the resting camels and the dying fire, and look up for a little while at the great wheel of the stars turning slowly overhead, the stars so thick and so bright in the clear, dry desert air that they seem close enough to touch, the great river of them spilling across the whole dark sky. And they think, perhaps, drowsily, of the home they left so long ago and so far away, or of the journey's end so far ahead, or of nothing at all, only the warmth of the blanket and the slow breathing of the camels and the soft crackle of the dying fire and the great silence of the desert night. And one by one, slowly, they fall asleep, out under the stars, on the floor of the empty land, halfway along the oldest road in the world, with the loaded saddlebags of the whole world's medicine resting in their careful rows in the dark beside them. And the fire burns down to embers, and the embers fade to ash, and the great cold stars wheel slowly overhead, and the caravan sleeps deep and quiet in the vast still dark until the cold grey dawn, when it will all begin again, the loading and the forming of the line and the soft ringing of the bell and the slow patient walking on toward the west, toward the sea, toward the journey's end. There is, in that slow nightly rhythm, repeated night after night, all the long length of the road, a deep and an ancient calm, the calm of the simple life lived close to the slow turning of the day and the night and the season, the calm of the long patient effort and the deep earned rest, the calm of the small warm circle of the fire in the great cold dark, the calm of lying down, tired and fed and warm, beneath the great wheel of the stars, with the day's long work behind and the night's deep rest ahead. And there is no better medicine in all the world, I have sometimes thought, than that simple, slow, earned rest at the end of the honest day, and no gentler way to come toward sleep than to lie, in the mind, with the sleeping caravan, out under the great desert stars, and to feel the long day's road behind you, and the warm fire dying beside you, and the deep night's rest coming, slowly, surely, to gather you in. And now the caravan has come, at last, down out of the dry land and through the coastal hills, and into the old stone city by the warm inland sea, and the long road is truly at its end, and the loads, which have been lashed and unlashed so many hundreds of times across so many thousands of miles, are unlashed now for the last time and set down in the cool, shaded courtyard of the great merchant's warehouse by the harbour, and opened, all of them one by one, for the last time, and the goods of the whole road are unpacked and sorted and weighed and made ready, some to be sold here in the coastal markets, some to be loaded onto the ships that wait in the old stone harbour, their sails furled, their decks rising and falling gently on the slow swell of the warm inland sea, ready to carry the goods of the road on, across the water to the far western lands. And the camels, their long work done, are led away to the green meadows beyond the city to rest and to graze and to grow fat before they turn in time to make the long journey back again toward the east. And the men of the caravan, their long work done, are paid and rest in the inns and the courtyards of the coastal city before they too in time turn back toward the east or sign on for some new journey. For the road is never truly finished, but only flows on east and west and east forever, carrying the goods and the medicines and the wisdom of the world slowly back and forth across the wide earth, hand to hand, market to market, generation to generation, all the long length of the oldest road in the world. And so our journey too comes at last gently to its end. The saddlebags are empty now, all of them, their precious cargo unpacked and sorted and weighed and put away. The great remedy made and sealed and set to age on the high shelf, the camels resting in the green meadows, the men resting in the cool courtyards, the ships waiting, gently rising and falling, in the old stone harbour under the last gold light of the long day's end. There is nothing more to gather now, and nowhere more to go, and nothing left to do at all, but to rest, here, at the western end of the road, by the warm shining sea, and to let the long journey settle slowly into the deep quiet of the memory, the way the dust of the road settles, slowly, in the still air of a shuttered shop at the end of the day. So let us rest, now. Let the whole long road settle behind us. Let the breath grow slow and deep and easy, and let us draw gently toward the close of the night. There is one more slow remembering I would like us to make, before the night closes over us entirely, for of all the gentle arts of the road, there is one that I have loved, in my own long life, above almost any other, and that is the slow, patient art of the still, the drawing of the very soul of a plant up in fragrant steam, and down again in cooling. And I would like us to sit, one last time, in the warm quiet of a still house, and watch the slow drops fall. For there are few things in all the long life of the road more deeply calming to watch than the slow falling of the drops of a fragrant water from the curving neck of a gentle still. Let us go back, then, in the mind, once more, to the kingdom of the rose, and to the great river, city of peace, just beyond it, where this gentle art was carried to its height. And let us stand, very quietly, in the corner of a still house on a warm, slow evening, and watch the master at his patient work. The still house is a small, low room, warm and dim and fragrant, lit by a single lamp and by the low red glow of the gentle fire beneath the still, and the whole room is full of the warm, sweet scent of the roses, for the great rounded copper vessel of the still is full, tonight, of the fresh, picked petals of the morning's roses, gathered in the cool grey dawn, before the scent could fade, and brought, quickly here, to the still. The master has filled the great copper belly of the still with the cool dew, wet petals and a measure of clear water, and has set upon it the curving copper cap, the head that gathers the rising steam, and has joined to the head the long curving neck that carries the steam away and down, and has led the long neck down through the trough of cool water, where the steam will cool, and has set, beneath the far end of the neck, the small, clean glass vessel that will catch the slow falling drops, and now he has only to tend the gentle fire, and to wait, with the great patience that the art demands, for the slow work to do itself. And so we wait, with the master, in the warm, fragrant dim, and watch the gentle fire, and presently, as the water in the great copper belly grows warm, and then warmer, a change begins very slowly. In the still, a faint singing in the copper, a faint stirring, and then, as the water comes at last to its slow, gentle simmer, the fragrant steam begins to rise up out of the warm petals, carrying with it the very soul of the rose, the scent, and the gentle virtue, and the captured summer of the petals, and the steam rises up into the copper head, and gathers there, and is led away down the long curving neck, and passes through the cool water of the trough, and cools and turns slowly, drop by drop, back into a clear fragrant liquid, and the first slow drop gathers, trembling at the far end of the long neck, and swells and hangs and falls at last, with the smallest soft sound, into the waiting glass below, and then, after a slow while, another, and then, after a slow while, another. The slow falling of the fragrant drops, one by one, into the waiting glass, each drop a little of the captured soul of the rose, each drop the slow patient gift of the gentle fire, and the cool water, and the long curving copper, and the great patience of the master, falling slowly, one by one, through the long warm fragrant evening, while the master sits quiet by the gentle fire, tending it, watching, waiting, in no hurry at all, for the slow art will not be hurried, and the man who would hurry it would only spoil it, and so he sits and waits, and the drops fall slowly, one by one, into the glass, and the warm room fills slowly with the deepening scent of the rose. There is, in the watching of that slow falling of the fragrant drops, a calm so deep that it is almost a kind of sleep, and I have sat myself, in my own long life, through many a long slow evening by a gentle still, watching the slow drops fall, one by one, into the glass, and have felt the whole of the busy day, and all its troubles and its hurry, drain slowly away from me, drop by drop, with the falling of the fragrant water, until there was nothing left in the whole world but the warm, dim, fragrant room, and the low red glow of the gentle fire, and the slow soft singing of the copper, and the slow soft falling of the drops, one by one, into the waiting glass. If ever you cannot sleep, on some future night, you might try to call that slow still house back into your mind, the warm, dim, fragrant room, the gentle fire, the slow falling of the fragrant drops, one by one, and to let the slow counting of them, the slow soft falling of them, draw your own busy mind down, gently, the way it drew mine, into the deep calm of the patient art, for there are few better ways in all the world to come towards sleep than to sit in the mind in a warm, fragrant, still house on a slow evening, and to watch and to wait with no hurry at all while the slow drops fall. And let us make one last slow remembering of the great spice markets of the warm green land of 5 rivers, for there is a calm there too, of a different kind, the calm of great abundance gathered and ordered and at rest. Let us walk in the mind one last time through the spice market of a great southern city in the cool of the evening, when the day's loud trading is done, and the market is growing quiet, and the merchants are folding away their wares, and the last golden light slants in, low through the high openings, onto the great heaped piles of the spices, the deep red mounds of the dried chilies, and the bright gold hills of the turmeric, the dark heaps of the peppercorns, and the pale heaps of the cardamom pods, the curling bundles of the cinnamon bark, and the small dark stars of the anise, the slender red threads of the saffron in their small careful jars, the great sacks of the dry ginger and the long pepper, all of it heaped and ordered, and at rest in the cool, quiet evening, and the air so thick and so deep with the mingled scent of all of it, the warm and the sweet and the sharp and the pungent and the fragrant, all woven together into one deep rich scent that there is no other word for but the scent of the spice. Mark it itself, a scent that, once it is in the memory, never leaves it, the scent of the whole warm, fragrant abundance of the green river country, gathered and heaped and resting in the cool, quiet, golden evening at the close of the day. And let us watch one last time, in the cool, quiet evening of the spice market, a single old merchant, his day's trading done, sitting quiet on a low stool among his heaped fragrant wares, in the last of the golden light, his hands resting easy in his lap, his eyes half closed, breathing in slowly the deep rich scent of his own spices content at the end of the long day in the cool quiet, among the heaped fragrant abundance of his trade, at peace. And let that quiet old merchant, sitting easy in the cool fragrant evening among his spices, grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, the way the still house grew dim, and the way the whole long road has grown dim, and let him too, with all the rest, gently go. For now the night has come down deep around us, and there is nothing more to remember, and nothing more to gather, and the whole long road has drifted away into the warm, kind dark, the still house and the spice market, and the gardens, and the deserts and the mountains, and the markets, and the gentle remedies, and the kind hands, all of it grown slow and dim and far away, all of it letting us go, at last, down toward the deep good rest that has been waiting all this long night at the end of the road. So let us come now, slowly, with the whole journey behind us, and nothing at all ahead but rest, to the last quiet close of the night. We have come a very long way tonight, you and I, all the way from the eastern gate to the western sea, the whole length of the oldest road in the world, and there is nothing left to do now but to rest. And so let us rest slowly, in the warm lamplit quiet, and let the whole long journey drift back past us, one last time very gently, like a slow procession of remembered places passing before the half-closed eyes, asking nothing of us, only passing slowly and growing dim, and letting us go at last down into sleep. Let it begin, this last slow drifting back at the warm western sea, where we now rest, the old stone city, the cool, shaded courtyards, the ships rising and falling gently in the old stone harbor, the warm, dry hills behind the city scented with wild thyme and wild sage baking in the last of the sun, the fragrant gums weeping slowly from the small trees of the coastal slopes, the great remedy aging quietly in its sealed jar on the high shelf of the coastal shop by the sound of the sea. Let that warm coast grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, and let it go, and let the road draw back gently eastward to the great round city of peace, on the bank of the slow wide river, the city of 1,000,000 souls, the great house of learning where the wisdom of the whole world was gathered into one tongue, the gleaming honest drug shops of the licensed apothecaries with their true scales, the gentle perfected stills drawing the fragrant essences drop by slow drop, the great kind hospitals with their separate quiet halls, and their soft drifting music, and their careful kind nursing, the sweet gentle sleeping syrups given with such care to draw the troubled down into their merciful rest. Let that great learned river city grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, and let it go, and let the road draw back, gently further east and south, over the high cold passes, to the warm green land of 5 rivers, the heavy fragrant air full of the scent of night flowers, the deep golden root that stains everything with its glowing color, the beloved 3 fruit powder stirred into warm water at the close of the day, the holy fragrant leaf tended by every household door, the warm fragrant oil poured slow and worked gentle into the tired body by patient kind hands until the whole person softens and loosens and lets go and sinks towards sleep. Let that warm green ancient river country grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, and let it go, and let the road draw back gently north and west to the cool green gardens of the kingdom of the rose, the playing fountains and the straight channels of clear running water, the dark cypress trees, the fields of small pink roses gathered in the grey dawn before the scent could fade, the gentle copper stills drawing the very soul of the rose up in fragrant steam and down again in cooling, the sweet gentle syrups that even a child would gladly take, the slow evening walk by the running water beneath the cypress trees, the soft music drifting through the cool fragrant dusk. Let that cool green garden kingdom grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, and let it go. And let the road draw back gently further east to the loud, crowded, shaded bazaar of the Oasis cities, the green islands in the great brown sea of the desert, the deep, cool wells, the sweet dates of the palms that the desert peoples honored as the very tree of life, the warm, spiced milk given unasked to the tired traveler by the fire of the caravanserai on the cold, clear desert night, the great wheel of the desert stars turning slowly overhead. Let those green Isis cities grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, and let them go. And let the road draw back gently further east and up to the high, cold, shining roof of the world, the thin, bright air with its clean mineral taste, the endless golden plateau under the deep, dark, blue sky, the white mountains shining on every far horizon, the king of medicines that holds all the tastes within its single small fruit, the glowing red threads of the saffron flower, the calm, kind healer sitting through the long, cold night by the small butter lamp, watching the breath, giving the warm tea by the spoonful until the fever breaks toward the grey dawn. Let that high, cold, shining plateau grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, and let it go. And let the road draw back gently all the way to its beginning, to the great walled city at the eastern gate, in the grey light before the dawn, the long line of patient camels forming in the cold, the great medicine market heavy with 1,000 mingled scents, the man root pulled whole from the cold, dark forest soil after its 100 patient years, the small, sweet, sour red fruit that draws the racing heart down into quiet and brings the long, awaited sleep, the great mushroom of long life held in the hands of the spirits of long, quiet years. Let that great eastern city, where the whole long road began, grow slow and dim and gentle in the mind, and let it too go. And now the whole road has drifted back past us, the whole long journey, from the western sea to the eastern gate, every market and every mountain and every garden and every desert, and every gentle remedy and every kind hand, and it has all grown slow and dim and gentle and far away, like a thing remembered from very long ago, and there is nothing left to hold, and nothing left to do, and nowhere left to go, and the night has come down all around us, warm and dark and deep and kind. It is a strange and a comforting thing, when you sit quietly with it, To think how much of the long history of medicine, across all those lands and all those centuries, was in the end simply the slow, patient gathering of kindness, the slow, patient learning of how to ease one another's troubles, the warm cup given to the cold traveler, the calm presence kept through the long fevered night, the gentle hand laid on the tired body, the soft music played in the dark hall, the sweet syrup given to draw the suffering down into merciful sleep. Across all the thousands of miles of the road, and all the many languages, and all the different gods and different customs and different ways, the healers of every land were, in the end, all trying to do the same gentle thing, to ease the suffering of the people who came to them, to bring a little comfort, a little warmth, a little rest, into lives that were often hard and short and full of trouble. And the great road carried that kindness slowly, back and forth across the world, the kindness of the East flowing west, and the kindness of the West flowing east, market to market, hand to hand, century to century, so that the gentle warm cup of the one land became the gentle warm cup of the next. And the gentle bringing of sleep that the healers of the one land had learned was carried on to the healers of the next, until the whole wide world was bound together, quietly, by the long, slow, patient web of the shared wish to heal. And you are a part of that long, quiet web tonight, lying here in the warm dark at the end of the long journey, for every gentle remedy we have gathered along the road was meant, in the end, for just such a moment as this, the easing of a tired body and a busy mind down into rest, the bringing of quiet sleep to the wakeful, which the healers of every land along the road held to be among the very kindest and the very highest of all their works. They are all gone now, the patient apothecaries and the calm mountain healers and the learned physicians and the kind attendants of the great hospitals, gone these many long centuries, their names mostly forgotten, their shops long since fallen to dust, and yet the gentle thing they spent their lives in the keeping of, the wish to ease and to comfort and to bring rest, comes down, still, across all the long years, to you, here, tonight, in the warm dark, and asks of you only that you let yourself now, at last, be eased and comforted and brought to rest. So let the breath grow slow now and deep and easy, the slow, deep, easy breath of the sleeping caravan out under the desert stars, the slow, deep, easy breath of the tired body sinking, at last, into the warm bed at the journey's end. Let the shoulders soften, and the hands grow heavy, and the whole tired body grow warm and loose and still. Let the long road drift away into the dark, the markets and the mountains and the gardens and the deserts and the gentle remedies and the kind hands, all of it growing slow and dim and far away, all of it letting you go. There is nothing more to gather, and nowhere more to go, and nothing at all that the night asks of you, except that you rest. If, before you drift away entirely, you should wish to come and walk another road with me on another quiet night, you have only to return, and I will be here, with the lamp lit and the jars on the shelves, and a new journey ready to begin. But that is for another night, and there is no need to think of it now. For now, there is only the warm dark and the slow, deep, easy breath, and the long road drifting away behind you, and the deep, good rest that lies ahead. So rest now. Let go of the day and the road and the long journey, and let yourself sink slowly, gently, with nothing to hold and nothing to do, down and down and down into the warm, deep quiet of sleep, The lamp is burning low. The jars are quiet on their shelves. The long road is at its end, and there is all the time in the world now to rest. Sleep well, rest deep, and let the long, quiet night carry you gently, all the way down into your sleep.